Chapter 38-34. However, the biggest advantage of the true chi bomb was that it could create a destructive power that was above its level. If it was a martial arts skill, then no matter how much true chi there was, the upper limit of the power it could display was 10. This was limited by the level of strength. However, the true chi bomb was different. As long as there was enough true chi, then the final power created could reach 15 or even 20 or even more. Of course, there were advantages and disadvantages. The premise of the explosive power not only required a large amount of true chi, but also enough time to accumulate power in advance. However, this was simply unrealistic in actual combat. After all, the opponent would not foolishly stand there and wait for you to make a true chi bomb and then throw at his head, right? Previously, when Lin Yi was in the secular world, apart from using it in actual combat, the main use of the true chi bomb was for deterrence. Its nature was basically equivalent to that of a nuclear weapon. Although the true chi bomb did not have much value in actual combat, it was simply a tailor-made and excellent method to turn the situation around in order to solve Lin Yi's current predicament. He had long known that Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhu were waiting for him. As long as he took a step out of the inner street, he would definitely face a cruel and relentless pursuit. Although Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhu wished that they could tear Lin Yi into pieces, they did not dare to do so in the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, as long as he stayed in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi could peacefully hold his true chi bomb. However, for Lin Yi, things were easy to handle. He would try his best to hold the true chi bomb in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, and then throw it at Nan Tianyong's head. What kind of concept was it to condense a true chi bomb for an entire hour? Lin Yi was constantly condensing and replenishing his true chi at the same time. Anyway, there was enough time and no one to disturb him. Lin Yi only stopped when he was almost unable to control it. Even Lin Yi himself had never done such a crazy thing. Although the true chi bomb could theoretically condense true chi infinitely, its power could also be increased infinitely. But the prerequisite was that he had to be able to control it. Even if it was a true chi bomb, it was still a bomb. The more true chi one gathered, the more powerful it would be. However, at the same time, it would be harder to control. Once it exceeded the upper limit of one's control, if one was even slightly careless during the process, it was very likely that it would explode in one's own hands before being thrown at someone else's head. As for how powerful the Jin Chi bomb he could control, Lin Yi had never tested it before, so he naturally did not know. But this time, the arrow on the bowstring had to be fired. Even if he knew there was a risk, he had to do it. After all, Nan Tianyong was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, which was 4 levels higher than Lin Yi. In the face of such a great disparity in strength, even if it was a true chi bomb that could be used against enemies of a higher level, if it could not be held for a long time, it would be very difficult for it to be effective. Lin Yi only had one chance. If the chi bomb didn't kill the opponent, he'd be killed. There would not be a second chance. There was only one outcome waiting for him, and that was death. Therefore, Lin Yi crazily held it for a whole hour. Obviously feeling that the Jun Chi bomb was starting to become a little unstable and had reached the limit of his control, he finally walked out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce and faced it at a close distance, provoking Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhu. Out of the same concerns as Nan Tianyong, Lin Yi didn't dare throw this chi bomb in the crowded market. After all, once this thing left his hand, it would explode. After all, once this thing left his hand, it was not something he could control. At that time, not only would he hurt innocent people, but he would also easily provoke experts that he could not afford to provoke. Therefore, Lin Yi used all his means and exerted all his strength to lure Nan Tianyong out of the market, and then threw this super Jin Chi bomb that he had been holding for a whole hour at his face. The Jin Chi bomb was a move that killed people indiscriminately. Although whether or not Lin Yi could kill Nan Tianyong was still a question mark, he could at least be sure that this Jin Chi bomb would absolutely not have a problem killing him. At the same time that he threw the Jin Chi bomb, Lin Yi did not hesitate to use all the Zhen Qi in his body to wrap himself up tightly, and then used all his strength to escape from the center of the explosion. Even though Lin Yi was already so careful, his current state was really unbearably embarrassing. Even the word embarrassing could not be used to describe it, and could only be used with another word, miserable. His whole body was scorched black, and there were many places that were badly mutilated. Although, in fact, he did not exchange even half a move with the opponent, the injuries on Lin Yi's body at the moment were far worse than when he fought with Yu Zhe, a middle-stage foundation establishment stage expert, last time. And Lin Yi was only affected by the aftermath of his Zhen Qi bomb, and he had used Zhen Qi to defend himself in advance. On the other hand, Nan Tianyong, who was completely unprepared, was directly thrown in the face by Lin Yi's Zhen Qi bomb. The miserable state of this dignified peak late-stage foundation establishment stage expert could be imagined. With a full 4 levels of suppression, as long as Nan Tianyong was a little bit on guard, the strongest killing move of any peak early-stage foundation establishment stage expert would be a joke in front of him, and it was impossible for him to be injured at all. Therefore, to say that he did not underestimate Lin Yi when facing him was absolutely a lie. It was also because he underestimated the opponent that this time he was really fooled by Lin Yi. In order to ensure that the Zhen Qi bomb in his hand could explode the opponent, Lin Yi did not hesitate to put himself in danger. Otherwise, if they were too far apart with Nan Tianyong's strength, he could completely react in time and then respond. But now that the two of them were so close, no matter how strong Nan Tianyong was, he did not have the chance to react. The Super Zhen Qi bomb that he had been holding back for a whole hour was thrown in his face without warning. Nan Tianyong only had time to curse, and then there was a loud noise and his vision went black. A dignified peak late-stage foundation establishment stage expert was fooled by Lin Yi just like that, and without saying anything, he was directly beaten to the ground. He did not know whether he was dead or alive. With the cover of the aftermath of the Zhen Qi bomb and the dust that filled the sky, Lin Yi did not care whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive. The only thing he needed to do now was to run. Even if this opportunity was very rare, Lin Yi should cut the weeds and root out the roots of Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe. Otherwise, the next time he met these two people, it would be very difficult for him to have a whole hour to hold the Zhen Qi bomb like this time. At that time, he would have no strength to fight back at all. Chapter 38-35. Other than Nan Tianyong, who was fooled by him, there was also Yu Zhe, who was in the middle stage of the foundation establishment realm. Just now, Yu Zhe was quite a distance away from the two of them. Even if he was hit by the true Qi bomb, his injuries were far less serious than Lin Yi, who was at the center of the explosion. If Lin Yi dared to turn around, then there was no doubt that he would definitely die in Yu Zhe's hands. Lin Yi didn't dare to turn around. In reality, Yu Zhe had already pissed his pants. Due to the distance, Yu Zhe didn't suffer any serious injuries from the true Qi bomb. However, after seeing Nan Tianyong, who was a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm expert, get knocked down by Lin Yi in one move, he was truly afraid this time. If Lin Yi turned around at this time, he might not even dare to attack Lin Yi. Instead, he might turn around and run. Knocking down Nan Tianyong in one move was too fucking exaggerated. According to normal people's logic, if Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm expert, couldn't withstand one move from him, then wouldn't Yu Zhe, a mere middle-stage foundation establishment realm expert, not even be enough to fill the gaps between his teeth? It wasn't that Lin Yi didn't consider this possibility, but from the last exchange, he could see that Yu Zhe wasn't a simple character. If he wasn't scared away and was instead seen through, then it would really be a joke. Other than safety, Lin Yi's decision to turn around and leave had a deeper concern, and that was the impact of killing Nan Tianyong. Nan Tianyong's identity, other than being Yu Zhe's master and a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm expert, was also the supervising deacon of Soaring Sky Pavilion. This was a very sensitive matter. Once something happened, it would definitely attract the attention of the 3 pavilions and the enforcement hall. Last time, The guest experts of the Hong Chamber of Commerce didn't really make a move on him because of this concern. If Lin Yi used the true Qi bomb to directly kill him this time, then there was nothing much to say. He turned around and ran without hesitation. However, if he wanted to confirm whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive, then it would be a stupid choice. Leaving aside the possibility of being killed by Yu Zhe, and even if Nan Tianyong didn't die, he could still be killed by Nan Tianyong. Even if he didn't consider these two risks, it wouldn't be a good thing even if he managed to kill Nan Tianyong. At that time, if the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions and the law enforcement hall were alerted, they would send people everywhere to dig 3 feet into the ground. Then his identity as Lin Air might be exposed, and that would be troublesome. Under the shroud of dust, Yu Zhe's heart trembled for a long time, but he didn't see Lin Yi turn around. Only then did he relax a little. Then he slapped himself twice regretfully. With Yu Zhe's intelligence, since he realized that Lin Yi didn't dare to come back, he could easily guess that Lin Yi wasn't in a good state right now. It was very likely that such a heaven-defying killing move could only be used once. Because in theory, if Nan Tianyong was blown to such a state, then Lin Air definitely wouldn't be any better. If he had directly chased after him, he would have had a very good chance of killing him. But now, it was too late to say anything. Lin Yi had already disappeared without a trace. Even if Yu Zhe wanted to chase, he didn't know which direction to go. He could only give up. Master, how are you? After coming to his senses, other than slapping himself, the first thing Yu Zhe did was confirm whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive. He searched for a long time in the deep pit under his feet. Yu Zhe finally found the dying Nan Tianyong in the center of the mud. Although he wasn't far from death, he was still an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment stage. Even if he was destroyed by a super true energy bomb at such a close distance, he was still able to hang on to his last breath. His life force was far beyond that of a normal person. He actually didn't die. Seeing this, Yu Zhe couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. Although Nan Tianyong was his master and his backer, in this kind of situation, he actually wanted Nan Tianyong to die. As long as Nan Tianyong died, this matter would definitely blow up. At that time, this Lin Second, who had come out of nowhere, would definitely be unable to hide. At that time, as long as he grasped the right opportunity, he would still have a chance to take back the Starring Stone. Apart from that, Nan Tianyong was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. Any item on him was a precious treasure that could only be chanced upon by luck. If Nan Tianyong became a corpse now, then all the treasures on him would belong to Yu Zhe. Not only could he make a windfall, but he could also blow the matter up so that Lin Air would have nowhere to hide. At this moment, if he could kill his cheap master, Nan Tianyong, it would be killing 2 birds with 1 stone for Yu Zhe. Yu Zhe narrowed his eyes, and killing intent flickered within them. In any case, this old fellow was already on the verge of death and wasn't far from death. Why not just send him on his way? Heaven, earth, monarch, and teacher. The teacher is like a father. Killing the teacher is like killing the father. However, something like killing one's teacher, no matter where it was placed, and if it was discovered, one would definitely be spurned by the world, but what if it wasn't discovered? At this moment, there was no one around. Only Yu Zhe and his dying master, Nan Tianyong. Even if he hardened his heart and killed his master, no one would know. What's more, he could very well push all the blame onto Lin Yi's head. After all, with such a super-killing move that had never been seen before, even if it killed a peak late-stage Foundation establishment realm expert, people would still believe it if he said it. Moreover, if Yu Zhe really said it like that, then perhaps even Lin Yi himself would believe it, because he had no chance to confirm whether or not Nan Tianyong had already been killed by a super chi bomb. He would never have thought that, in the end, Nan Tianyong would actually die at the hands of his own disciple. He slowly walked to Nan Tianyong's side. At this moment, Nan Tianyong's body was mostly buried in the mud, and his breath was already as weak as a normal person's. The thought of killing his master grew stronger and stronger in Yu Zhe's mind. In the end, Yuja grimaced and secretly gritted his teeth. In front of benefits, he could even kill his own father, let alone a cheap master. Since you're already so heavily injured, rather than wasting resources by living, why not give all these resources to your disciple, me? Don't worry, your disciple will avenge you, master. Yuja's eyes carried a cold light, and at the tip of his finger, a ray of sword chi quietly condensed. Chapter 38-36. Being swept by Nan Tianyong's gaze, Yuja's heart couldn't help but tremble even though he knew that his cheap master was extremely weak. He quickly hid the sword chi behind his back. Even though Yuja often interacted with Nan Tianyong, he didn't know how strong a peak late-stage Foundation Establishment realm expert was. In Yuja's eyes, it was still unknown whether or not Nan Tianyong still had the ability to kill in his dying state. Although the temptation of killing his master was very big, Yuja didn't dare to act rashly before confirming Nan Tianyong's true state. "Master, how are you now? Are your injuries serious?" Yuja hid the sword chi behind his back and pretended to be worried as he asked. After a long while, Nan Tianyong didn't speak. Or, strictly speaking, he couldn't speak at all at this moment. It was already extremely difficult for him to maintain his last trace of weak breath. If he were to force himself to speak, he would probably die before he could catch his breath. The super chi bomb that Lin he had held back for a whole hour was after all not just for show. This kind of power was enough to pose a fatal threat to any peak late-stage Foundation Establishment realm expert. Moreover, Nan Tianyong was hit by Lin Yi's true chi bomb because he underestimated his opponent. He wasn't prepared at all and was even hit in the face by Lin Yi. With such a close distance and such a terrifying attack, Nan Tianyong was able to survive and still hang on to his last breath. This was already very impressive for him. If it was any other expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, they would have already become a corpse by now. They might not even have a whole corpse left. Seeing that Nan Tianyong couldn't speak at all, Yuja felt a bit more at ease. He sneakily took out his sword chi. After all, killing one's master was too disgraceful. Even though Yuja already had this plan, when the time came, he still couldn't help but tremble in panic. Che, what's there to be afraid of? One slash of the sword will bring at least 50 years of hard work. Yuja secretly cheered himself on. He took a deep breath and prepared to behead his cheap master. However, at this moment, from the direction of the market, there was a sudden sound of footsteps and noise. Yuja was shocked and immediately reacted. These people should have been attracted by the huge movement just now. As expected, the sound of discussion got closer and closer. Look ahead, a few mountains have collapsed. This is nothing. Look at this deep pit. Fuck, what kind of expert is this? It can't be a Foundation Establishment Great Circle, right? There seems to be someone in front. This time, Yuja instantly panicked. If there was no one around, then he would kill his cheap master. As long as he pushed the blame on Lin Yi, it would indeed be a win-win situation. However, in this current situation, if he dared to do that under the watchful eyes of so many people, he would definitely be consigned to eternal damnation once he was noticed by any observant person. Killing one's master. However, if even the slightest bit of information was leaked, he would definitely become the target of public criticism. At that time, not only would the 3 great pavilions want to kill him, if Nan Tianyong's relatives and friends wanted to kill him, even these onlookers would besiege him under the banner of justice. From then on, he, Yuja, will be the public enemy of the world. There would be no place for him to hide. If he was so strong that he was invincible, then so be it. At most, his reputation would be ruined. However, Yuja was only in the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. If he was accused of killing his master, then without a doubt, his entire life would be ruined. There would be no chance for him to make a comeback. With such a temptation in front of him, killing Nan Tianyong would be worth 50 years of cultivation. He could also make a big deal out of this and use the 3 great pavilions to force Lin Yi into a corner. If he missed this chance, he would never have such a chance again in his next life. Yuja was unwilling to give up just like that. Seeing that the onlookers were getting closer and closer, Yuja gritted his teeth and decisively dug Nan Tianyong out from the ground and carried him on his back. Without another word, he turned and ran. "Someone's running," an onlooker with good eyesight shouted, causing a commotion. However, they had no idea what was going on. Even if there were people who wanted to take advantage of the situation, they didn't dare to chase after him. The commotion just now was far too exaggerated. Conservatively speaking, it would take at least an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm to be able to create such a huge commotion. Even if the two sides were to fight to the death, it was still not something that the people present could deal with. To be able to fight against a peak Foundation establishment realm expert, even if the opponent was heavily injured, one would need to be at least at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm. Only then would they have the confidence to take advantage of the situation. Otherwise, it was very likely that they wouldn't get any benefits and would instead lose their lives. However, peak Foundation establishment realm experts weren't common people on the streets, at least not in the outer streets of the city. Because of the huge commotion just now, although there were many onlookers who were attracted over, none of them had such strength. As for the others, they didn't have this strength, so they naturally didn't have the guts to act rashly. In the cultivation world, although the weak were prey to the strong, and it wasn't strange for people to take advantage of the situation, the prerequisite was that they had the strength to do so. It was also because of this that Yuja was able to smoothly take Nan Tianyong away. Otherwise, with his mid-Foundation establishment realm strength and his injuries, it would be very difficult for him to escape unscathed in front of so many onlookers. Carrying the dying Nan Tianyong on his back, Yuja didn't run too far. He came to a secluded corner and immediately stopped. Taking a deep breath, the killing intent in Yuja's eyes was even more resolute than before. The reason why Yuja brought Nan Tianyong to this secluded place wasn't because he gave up on the idea of killing his master. On the contrary, the only reason he did this was to get rid of the onlookers and not let them ruin his plans. Because Nan Tianyong and Yuja often appeared in the city these days, even these onlookers could easily recognize them. Therefore, Yuja didn't even think that he wouldn't be recognized. Once he was recognized, it would be very easy for him to leave a hidden danger if he wanted to do anything. No matter how covert his action of killing Nan Tianyong was, it was still very risky. Therefore, Yuja carried Nan Tianyong away in front of so many people not to hide his identity. At this time, he only wanted to hide one thing, and that was Nan Tianyong's life and death. Chapter 38-37. As long as no one could see whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive, then when they ran to a secluded place with no one around, even if Nan Tianyong really killed his cheat master, he could push the blame onto Lin Yi without leaving any flaws. Everything that happened just now was exactly as Yuja expected. The onlookers didn't have the guts to chase after them, and with their distance, they had no way of confirming whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive. They would only think that Yuja was afraid that someone would take advantage of the situation, so out of caution, he carried Nan Tianyong away. Everything was within Yuja's control. Then, no one will disturb us now. Are you ready to be on your way, my master? The sinister smile on Yuja's face sent chills down people's spines. Nan Tianyong, who was originally on the verge of death and couldn't sense what was going on outside, suddenly seemed to realize something and opened his eyes. Then, Nan Tianyong grabbed Yuja's ankle without any warning and said weakly, "Go on our way?" "On what way?" Being grabbed by Nan Tianyong like this, Yuja instantly broke out in a cold sweat and had goosebumps all over his body. Even someone as scheming as him couldn't help but feel his mind go blank at this moment. Nan Tianyong was a true peak late-stage Foundation establishment realm master. Even if he was on the verge of death, if he had a final burst of energy and used a killing move, then Yuja, a middle-stage Foundation establishment realm master, wouldn't be able to handle it. However, after waiting nervously for a moment, he realized that Nan Tianyong didn't make any follow-up movements. After carefully looking at his pale face, Yuja's hanging heart finally fell to the ground. Although he still had some misgivings in his heart, at this moment, the arrow on the bow had to be fired. After all, he had already said what he wanted to say, and it was already too late to turn back. Even if Nan Tianyong was currently in a state of near death, he might not be able to clearly hear what Yuzha said just now, and even if he heard it now, he might not be able to remember it afterwards. However, Yuzha didn't dare to take this risk. It was true that Nan Tianyong's brain was simple, but as a peak late-stage Foundation Establishment Realm Master, could it be that he was an incurable idiot? What if this guy had already completely understood his plan and was just trying to confuse him? What if he was deliberately acting and preparing to settle the score later? Even if the possibility wasn't high, if it really became a reality, then he would be better off dead. Whatever, whether it's a meteoric rise or a failure at the last step, I have to take this gamble. After realizing this, killing intent condensed in Yuzha's eyes. He no longer cared if Nan Tianyong had a final burst of energy before death. A sword chi from his fingertip pierced towards Nan Tianyong's chest. You. Nan Tianyong only had time to say half a word. His eyes were filled with disbelief, and he used the last bit of his strength to resist. Unfortunately, even an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, like him, could no longer move after being hit in the face by Lin Yi's super true chi bomb. After all, he was able to hang on to his last breath. This in itself was already a rare miracle. Puchi, accompanied by the muffled sound of flesh being cut, the sword chi at Yuzha's fingertip directly stabbed into Nan Tianyong's heart, and then twisted 360 degrees, viciously twisting. Nan Tianyong's body suddenly trembled. The hand that was grabbing onto Yuzha's ankle tightly clenched, as if he had used up the last of his strength. Unfortunately, a great expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm didn't have any strength to fight back at this time. Forget about the final burst of energy before death. Even heavily injuring Yuzha was unrealistic. At most, he would leave a green mark on Yuzha's ankle, which was of no use at all. You won't have a good death. Someone will avenge me. Before he finished speaking, Nan Tianyong's neck crooked, and he actually died. TCH, someone will avenge you? Yuzha spent a lot of effort to pry off Nan Tianyong's hand that was grabbing onto his ankle. He sneered and said, "There is indeed someone who will avenge you. The three heroes of the Nan family are not just for show. However, the person who killed you is called Lin Er, right?" There was no one around, and no one saw that it was him, Yuzha, who did it. Moreover, the wound caused by his sword chi was no different from the wound caused by Lin Yi's true energy bomb. It was completely possible to push the blame on a Lin Yi, and it would be difficult for others to see any flaws. Pausing for a moment, Yuzha saw that although Nan Tianyong was already dead, his pair of eyes were still staring at him. He couldn't help but secretly curse at his bad luck. Humph! Die with grievances? Yuzha curled his lips in ridicule. My cheap master, you don't have to die with grievances. Your disciple, I, will personally ask your two brothers to avenge you. But before that, your disciple will reluctantly take over the treasures on your body. Finished speaking, Yuzha's eyes suddenly revealed a look of greed, and then he bent down and searched Nan Tianyong from head to toe. Once was not enough. He even searched 2 or 3 times, until everything on his body was clean. Only then did he finally stop. A man can't be rich without a windfall, and a horse can't be fat without grass at night. This saying is indeed true. Looking at the various treasures on Nan Tianyong's body, even with Yuzha's shrewdness, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. Just how deep was his foundation? To a mere expert at the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, like Yuzha, this was more than equivalent to 50 years of bitter cultivation. Even 100 years might not be enough. His heart was bursting with joy. After putting away the treasures in front of him, Yuzha once again carried Nan Tianyong's corpse on his back, deliberately pretending to be in grief, and turned around to return to the soaring sky pavilion. Carrying Nan Tianyong's corpse back, he would first make the matter as big as possible, and then he would ask Nan Tianyong's two brothers to avenge him. At that time, he didn't have to worry about not alarming the three great pavilions and the law enforcement hall, and that Lin Air wouldn't be able to roam freely outside. Yu's plan could be said to be shrewd. However, even if he was beaten to death, he would never have thought that after he left with Nan Tianyong's corpse on his back, a familiar figure would walk out from the bushes. This figure was none other than Lin Yi, who had used all his strength to escape after throwing out the super true energy bomb. You even dare to kill your own master, and you still want to push the crime onto my head. The soaring sky pavilion has really raised a monster. Lin Yi laughed and shook his head. Even though he had killed his way up from the mortal world and made countless enemies, he had never seen such a sinister person. Chapter 38:38. Lin Yi had already made up his mind to leave the scene as soon as possible. After all, he had suffered serious injuries from the super vital energy bomb, and the vital energy in his body had been exhausted because he had used too much vital energy jet before. No matter how he thought about it, it was better for Lin Yi to leave as soon as possible. After all, there was an old saying that of the 36 stratagems, it was best to leave. But there was also an old saying that it was dark under the light. The more dangerous the place was, the safer it was. It was a rare opportunity to deal with Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe. Lin Yi was not willing to let it go. Even if he was not in a good state, he could still observe the situation and wait for an opportunity. So Lin Yi turned back halfway and saw Yu Zhe's every move from afar. He just followed from afar and did not show himself. You want to frame me with this? Isn't this scheme a little too clever? Lin Yi smiled coldly and shook his head. At this moment, he was holding a phone from the secular world, and this phone had recorded the entire scene of Yu Zhe killing his master. It was difficult for high-tech product from the secular world to be brought to Heaven Island. Even if they could be brought up through the teleportation array, they would inevitably be destroyed by the pressure. Especially something as sophisticated as a phone, it was impossible to use normally. But Lin Yi had a cheat like the space in the Jade Pendant. It was difficult for other people to bring up high-tech products intact, but it was not a problem for Lin Yi. Of course, things like a phone were almost useless to cultivators, especially in a place like Heaven Island. It was useless without a signal. Lin Yi did not intend to bring it up, but he had long been used to putting everything on him in the space in the Jade Pendant. This time, he brought the phone up. It was purely a convenience. Not only the phone, but even the charger was stored in the space in the Jade Pendant. Back in the secular world, it was to keep in touch with the girls and his underlings at all times. He had specially asked someone to configure a solar power bank. Ever since he came to Heaven Island, although the mobile phone had lost its call function, it was still a habit of modern urbanites. There were photos of all the women stored in it. Lin Yi would often charge it and flip through it to take a look, even though he couldn't meet them for the time being, and many of them were still unconscious. But when he had nothing to do, he would look at these photos to remind himself of the person. It was also a form of motivation for him to improve his strength. Lin Yi didn't expect this habit to come in handy at a time like this. He was able to secretly record the scene of Yu Zhe killing Nan Tianyong. Lin Yi was surprised by such a huge harvest. With such a video in their hands, it was equivalent to holding onto Yu Zhe's fatal weakness. Even if this guy really made a big deal out of it, Yu Zhe wouldn't be able to escape. In the future, in front of Lin Yi, he would not be able to cause any more trouble. If Lin Yi really wanted to deal with him, he wouldn't even need to make a move. All he had to do was show the video. Nan Tianyong's two brothers would definitely take the initiative to do it for him. The name of the three heroes of the Nan family had spread throughout the three pavilions. Nan Tianyong was ranked last, and his strength was also the weakest. However, he was already an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. He was in charge of the important position of Soaring Pavilion's supervising deacon. As for his two brothers, it could be imagined that they were even more unfathomable. With the strength and status of these two people, if they really let them know that Yu Zhe, their disciple, had personally killed Nan Tianyong, then even if Yu Zhe fled to the ends of the earth, he wouldn't be able to escape from their pursuit. Although cultivators are powerful, ordinary people in the secular world aren't completely useless. High-tech things really can't be underestimated. Lin, he smiled. When the time comes, this matter would really be exposed. Yuja, this guy, would never have thought that he would fall in the hands of ordinary people's high-tech. However, Lin didn't intend to release this video so easily. Although he and Yuja wouldn't rest until one of them was dead, and if he released it like this, he would definitely be able to kill Yuja. However, this would also easily expose his own identity, and even the secret of the space in the Jade Pendant. After all, ordinary people would directly associate something like a cell phone with the secular world, and the people who had the deepest relationship with the secular world could only be Lin, E, and the other newcomers who had been teleported up from the secular world. It should be known that the last time a newcomer from the secular world was teleported up was already 1,000 years ago. At that time, there was no such thing as a cell phone at all. Looking at the entire northern island of the Heaven Stage Island, the only people who might have a cell phone on them were Lin, E, and the others. Lin Yi's identity would be easily exposed if someone came to investigate, and Yuja would be able to guess that he was Lin Air. Not only would the secret of the star Inkstone be exposed, but the fact that he brought the phone up undamaged would also cause people to investigate him. Lin, he wouldn't be able to stop them even if he wanted to. Putting the cell phone back into space in the Jade Pendant, Lin E smiled faintly, then turned around and returned to the Welcome Pavilion. Before waiting for a suitable opportunity, he would temporarily let Yuja jump around. The higher he jumped, the harder he would fall. Returning to the Welcome Pavilion, the only thing Lin he had to do next was to continue nurturing the two awakened heart-devouring exquisite grass seeds in the space in the Jade Pendant until they finally matured. Only then could they be used to refine the foundation-building pill. Once he successfully refined the foundation-building pill, for Lin E, it also meant that he was not far from the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. Apart from that, the newcomer challenge was in full swing. In the eyes of other newcomers, it was an important life event that determined their future, but for Lin E, it was almost completely a side event. Apart from the points that Cha Wu had given him at the beginning, no one dared to challenge him afterward. Looking at all the newcomers in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, the only one who could have an impact on him was Meng Tong. Although he had previously deduced that young Master Su and Meng Jueguang would not give up so easily, it was a fact that Meng Tong had not shown his strength for a long time. With Lin Yi's golden finger, as long as there was the slightest change in Meng Tong's strength, he would be able to detect it immediately. In reality, Meng Tong's strength did not change at all. Even after he recovered from his injuries, he did not challenge Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai again. Instead, he just followed behind them and took advantage of the situation. His cowardly behavior was completely different from Meng Tong's previous behavior. All the newcomers were discussing it, and the rumor had even developed into Lin Yi's group, dominating the situation. Meng Jueguang, the big senior brother, was helpless. As for Meng Tong, naturally, he could only admit defeat. Chapter 38-39. Lin E and the others, on the other hand, felt a strange pressure from this silence. The longer the opponent held back, the fiercer the backlash would be. However, the opponent did not move. Due to the ranking of the cave dwelling, Lin E and the others could not take the initiative to cause trouble for Meng Tong. They could only wait. That being said, no matter how fast Meng Tong improved, with Lin Yi's strength, there was no need to take him seriously. While Lin Yi was wholeheartedly cultivating the heart-devouring exquisite grass. As expected, after Yuja carried Nan Tianyong's corpse back, the entire Soaring Sky Pavilion was in an uproar. After all, Nan Tianyong was not an ordinary person. He was the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Such a key person was killed in the territory of the three great pavilions. This was simply a provocation to the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was impossible not to cause a commotion. Before the upper echelons of the Soaring Sky Pavilion could react, Yuja had already found one of Nan Tianyong's two elder brothers, the second brother, Southern Sky Gate. According to Yu's plan, he originally wanted to invite Nan Tianyong's two elder brothers, who were also his two martial uncles. Unfortunately, the eldest of the three Nan family heroes, Nan Tianba, was on a mission in the Outer Islands. Now, only the second brother, Southern Sky Gate, was left on the northern island of the Heaven Stage Island. However, even if it was only Southern Sky Gate, with his strength and position that was above Nan Tianyong's, it was more than enough for him to cause a commotion. One had to know that Southern Sky Gate's strength was even higher than Nan Tianyong's. However, to Yu's surprise, after seeing Nan Tianyong's corpse, Southern Sky Gate, the second brother of the same mother, did not have any expression of grief. Instead, he had a cold smile on his face. Third brother, this guy, is stupid and has a bad temper. Furthermore, his strength is so weak. When the eldest brother pushed this trash into the position of supervising deacon, I already knew that something bad would happen. As expected, Southern Sky Gate's face was filled with ruthless ridicule. There was not the slightest bit of brotherhood between them. Yu was instantly stunned. He was originally a little worried that the other party would investigate too much and find traces of his sword chi on Nan Tianyong's corpse. Although the sword chi wound on his chest was very similar to the other wounds caused by Jin Chi, if someone really compared it carefully, they would still be able to find something fishy. But now, Yu realized that he had been worrying in the wrong direction. With the South Heaven Gate's attitude, it was impossible for them to care about how their chief master, Nan Tianyong, had died. Why did this useless third brother only die now? On the other hand, what Yu needed to worry about the most was whether his second brother, the Southern Sky Gate, would stand up for his chief master. If the Southern Heavenly Gate did not do anything about Nan Tianyong's death, then it would be difficult for Yu to make use of this opportunity to blow the matter up. The Southern Heavenly Gate was Nan Tianyong's older brother. If even a close relative like him did not stand up and say anything, then even if the upper echelons of the Soaring Sky Pavilion were forced to intervene, they would not pay much attention to this matter. In this way, Yu wanted to use Nan Tianyong's death to alarm the three great pavilions and a law enforcement hall. Thus, it would be a little unrealistic to force out Lin Yi's purpose in the end. Just when Yu was racking his brains, not knowing how to persuade the other party to stand up for his chief master, the Southern Heavenly Gate took the initiative to speak. However, although I don't like the useless third brother, no matter what, he is still a member of our Nan family's three heroes. If we let him be killed like this, the three heroes of the Nan family's face will be completely lost. Moreover, when Boss comes back in the future, I won't be able to explain it to him. The Southern Heavenly Gate shook his head impatiently. After pondering for a moment, the Southern Heavenly Gate reluctantly stood up from the armchair. Forget it. No matter what, we are brothers. I'll have to work a little harder and go with you. Martial nephew, who did you say killed this piece of trash? Hearing this, Yu was stunned, then hurriedly replied, "It was a rogue cultivator called Lin Air." Rogue cultivator? The Southern Heavenly Gate glanced at Yu and couldn't help but ask suspiciously, "Although this third brother of mine is a bit of trash, he is still a member of our Nan family's three heroes, and his strength has barely reached the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. How could he be killed by a mere rogue cultivator?" Looking at the 5 great islands of Heaven Stage, although there were many grassroots rogue cultivators, because of the lack of cultivation resources, they were generally the weakest at the bottom. There were very few experts, especially experts at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage, which could be counted on one's fingers. Nan Tianyong was actually killed by a mere rogue cultivator in the territory of the 3 great pavilions. The possibility of this happening was almost zero. To kill an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage and not even give him a chance to escape, this person's strength had to be at least at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. How could it be easy to find such an expert among the rogue cultivators? Yu hurriedly nodded. "Martial uncle, I also feel that it is very unbelievable that Lin Air was able to kill Master. However, he is indeed a rogue cultivator who appeared out of nowhere. And on the surface, his strength is only at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. Peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. When the Southern Heavenly Gate heard this, he directly spat out a mouthful of tea in Yuja's face. He glared at him with a pair of triangular eyes and said with ill intentions, "Are you fucking lying to me? Are you tired of living?" Normally, even if it was an expert of the same level, because of the natural disadvantage of cultivation resources, a grassroots rogue cultivator would often not be a match for a sect cultivator like the Three Great Pavilions. In other words, even if the opponent was an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Nantianyong, let alone a peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. Even if the opponent really had the strength to challenge someone a higher level, he would at most be able to surpass one level. Although it was still very rare for a late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert to counterattack and kill a peak late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert, it was not completely unacceptable. If a mere rogue cultivator at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage was able to kill a peak late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert like Nantianyong, no one would believe such nonsense, not even a ghost. It was normal for the Southern Heavenly Gate to have such a reaction. Yuja had already expected this, so he could only smile bitterly as he wiped the tea off his face and hurriedly explained, "Martial uncle, don't be agitated. I also don't believe that this Lin heir is only at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. It's just that this person might have hidden his strength, and with my eyesight, I can't see through his strength." Chapter 3840. The cultivation world never lacked methods to hide one's strength. Some were very simple and could be easily seen through with a little bit of attention. However, there were also some that could be hidden very well and could be said to be impeccable. If a high-level cultivator purposely hid his strength, it wouldn't be difficult for someone stronger than him to see through him. However, if someone weaker than him, it would be very difficult. According to the Southern Sky Gate's judgment, if the opponent was able to kill Nantianyong, then the opponent should at least have the strength of the late stage of the foundational level, or even higher. With Yuja's mid-stage foundational level strength, it was normal for him to not be able to see through the opponent's disguise. Sure boy is wise. However, in this disciple's opinion, that brat's strength cannot compare to Master's. It was just that he exploded a great killing weapon, and Master was caught off guard. That was why he killed her in one move. Otherwise, that guy would be far from being Master's match. Yuja analyzed with a sorrowful expression. He had no idea what Lin Yi's true strength was. However, from the first time they fought, even if Lin Yi was stronger than him, it wasn't by much. This time, the reason why his cheat master Nantianyong was tricked was because he underestimated his opponent. He didn't even use any martial skills and was directly thrown in the face by the killer weapon. That's why he died in one move. Of course, Nantianyong didn't need to die. However, with such a cruel and unscrupulous disciple like Yuja, it was hard for him to not die. Killer weapon? The Southern Sky Gate's expression changed slightly, and he said with interest, "Martial nephew, why don't you tell me in detail? What kind of killer weapon was it to be able to kill third brother in one move?" The martial world was dangerous, and the cultivation world was a place where the weak were prey to the strong. Any cultivator with a bit of strength would have their own trump card. However, some were useful, while others were not. Some were ordinary, while others were heaven-defying. Regardless, since it could be used as a trump card, then compared to normal martial skills, there must be something special about it. As for the Southern Sky Gate, he was always interested in other people's trump cards. It wasn't because he was very curious, but because the cultivation technique he cultivated was very special. It was called the Lesser Formless Technique. In the cultivation world of Heaven Stage Island, there were 5 cultivation techniques that were widely known due to their powerful and heaven-defying effects. Moreover, they were highly respected, and almost all cultivators flocked to them. History had proven countless times that anyone who could obtain any one of them would have a high chance of ascending to the top in the future. These 5 techniques were collectively known as the 5 Great Divine Techniques. Among the 5 Great Divine Arts, there is a cultivation method called the non-phase divine art. According to legend, as long as one had this divine art, then using any martial skill would be a piece of cake. Even if he had never focused on cultivating, he would be able to imitate it with just a little experience, and its power would not be inferior to that of the original. This formless divine art, apart from being able to imitate anyone's martial technique, furthermore, it had an even more heaven-defying effect, which was that it could slowly merge the essence of the various martial skills that it had imitated. It became a brand new non-phase divine skill. In other words, this non-phase divine skill was a collection of the essence of 100 schools of thought. In theory, it was a super powerful martial skill that could continuously evolve and become stronger. This heaven-defying effect alone was enough to instantly defeat any martial skill. In the entire 5 Great Divine Islands, the number of cultivators who had the talent and the opportunity to cultivate the non-phase divine art could be counted on one hand. However, the minor non-phase divine art that the Southern Heaven Gate cultivated was not the original non-phase divine art. It was a simplified version that had been modified by an expert. Its effect was not as heaven-defying as the original non-phase divine art, but it still had the same effect, just that it was greatly weakened. The minor non-phase divine art could not fully replicate other martial skills. Even if it did, its power would be slightly weaker than the original version. Furthermore, unlike the original version, the minor non-phase divine art was not able to perfectly merge the essences of various martial skills and improve them infinitely. There were many limitations. That being said, the minor non-phase divine art was still an incredible art that far surpassed ordinary martial skills. There were not many people who had the opportunity to cultivate the minor non-phase divine art. The reason why the Southern Heaven Gate was able to acquire the minor non-phase divine art was not only because he was fortunate enough, but also because the 3 heroes of the Nan clan had a strong backer on the Middle Island. Chapter 38:41. Next, not only did he want to steal the Star Ink Stone from Lin Yi, he also wanted to become Southern Sky Gate's disciple and obtain the minor phaseless technique. With these 2 things to rely on, he would have the chance to become the strongest Golden Core expert in the future. He, Yuja, was not willing to be an ordinary nobody. Think about it. He even dared to do something like killing his own master, something that angered even the gods. What could stop him in the future? That being said, the difficulty of obtaining the minor phaseless magic from the South Heaven Gate was even higher than retrieving the Star Inkstone from Lin Air, who had appeared out of nowhere. Unlike the simple-minded Nan Tianyong, the second brother of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Nan Tianmin was extremely shrewd. Furthermore, from his reaction towards Nan Tianyong's death, it was obvious that he was a cold-hearted person. In fact, he could even be described as ruthless. No matter how bad his relationship with Nan Tianyong was, they were still brothers from the same mother. However, not only did he not feel the slightest bit sad about Nan Tianyong's death, he even seemed to be taking pleasure in Nan Tianyong's misfortune. If it wasn't for the face of the Nan clan's 3 heroes, he wouldn't even have asked about it. With such a temperament, Yuja, who had killed his own master, could be said to be jackals of the same tribe. To numb such a troublesome person and obtain the minor phaseless technique from him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, a technique like the minor phaseless technique was too rare. No matter how difficult it was, as long as there was a small chance, Yuja would not give up easily. This was similar to the Star Ink Stone, a technique that could change one's fate. However, its effect might not be as heaven-defying as the Star Ink Stone. Yuja knew that to obtain the minor phaseless technique, he had to first make Southern Sky Gate accept him as a disciple. If he wanted Southern Sky Gate to accept him as a disciple, then he had to curry favor with Southern Sky Gate and gain his recognition. Hearing Southern Sky Gate's question, Yuja was silent for a moment. Only then did he reply, reporting to Marshal Uncle, although I was present when Master was killed, because I was quite far away, and because Lin Air's attack was extremely sinister and covert, I didn't see it too clearly. I only know that the move seemed to have condensed an unimaginable amount of chi, and the power of the explosion in an instant even caused the surrounding mountains to collapse, leaving behind a huge crater. The scene was extremely shocking. Really? The Southern Heavenly Gate couldn't help but be taken aback when he heard this. In recent years, the three great pavilions have sent a lot of people to set up layers of protective arrays in every territory, especially in a place like the market, where all kinds of people are mixed together. In order to prevent cultivators from fighting and destroying the surroundings, they have specially arranged several layers of protective arrays. It is impossible for an ordinary person to destroy the surrounding mountains. Although the Foundation Establishment stage could only be regarded as a beginner on the Heavenly Stage Island, it was still a heaven-defying cultivator who seized the fortune of heaven and earth. If they really had to use their full strength, they would not be able to do so. Even a random early-stage Foundation Establishment expert could easily destroy a mountain range. There were so many experts on Heaven Stage Island, and there were all kinds of conflicts happening all the time. If there were no corresponding protective measures, the island would be destroyed. The 5 Heaven Islands had already been smashed to pieces, so how could they have been passed down for millions of years? The reason why the 5 Heaven-ranked islands were able to remain standing was due to the various sections. It was they who set up layers of protective arrays everywhere on Heaven Stage Island to offset the damage caused by the battle between cultivators, which allowed Heaven Stage Island to continue to exist until today. Take the protective arrays set up around the market by the 3 great pavilions as an example. Due to the gathering of people in the market, almost all the cultivators on the North Island were gathered here, not just the disciples of the 3 great pavilions. All kinds of conflicts were unavoidable every day. If it wasn't for special measures, this place would have been destroyed long ago. The protective arrays around the market had always been the tightest, and the defensive power had always been the strongest. Even a full blow from an early-stage Foundation Establishment stage expert would not be able to leave any marks around it. What kind of power was needed to destroy all the mountains around the market with a single move? Even an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm might not be able to do this. That's true, and according to Disciple's observation, that Lin Air himself doesn't seem to be able to control such a powerful killer move. He can only throw it out, and he can't maximize the lethality at all. Yuja pondered for a moment. Logically speaking, since the power of Lin Yi's killer move was so terrifying that it could overwhelm the protective arrays and destroy all the surrounding mountains, it should be easy to kill Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage Foundation Establishment stage expert, with such great power. However, although Nan Tianyong was caught off guard and was seriously injured, he did not die on the spot. If Yuja hadn't killed him out of greed, Nan Tianyong would have been alive and kicking at this moment. Yuja's speculation could be said to be reasonable, and it was indeed as he had speculated. Lin Yi couldn't completely control the true energy bomb, especially the super true energy bomb that he had been holding for an entire hour. Hearing Yuja's words, the smile on Southern Sky Gate's face couldn't help but deepen. Interesting. Using a killer move that he can't even completely control, he was able to jump levels and kill number 3. I am more and more interested in this Lin Air you mentioned. Yuja secretly smiled. It was good that he was interested. Otherwise, if this guy wasn't interested at all, how would he dig out this Lin Air for him? As expected, Southern Sky Gate immediately took the initiative to ask. Since that Lin Air is a loose cultivator, then martial nephew, do you know how to find him? Grassroot loose cultivators were not like the disciples of the 3 great pavilions. They rarely had a unique cultivation cave and often didn't have a fixed place to live. Unless one was especially familiar with them, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to find them. Reporting to Marshal Uncle, Disciple has been looking for him these days. I've been thinking of various ways, but I still haven't been able to dig him out. The reason why I was able to meet him in the market was purely by accident. Yuja replied respectfully. This is a bit troublesome. Southern Sky Gate couldn't help but frown. Even if the opponent had a killer move that could instantly kill Nan Tianyong, If he personally made a move, it wouldn't be a problem. However, how to find the opponent as soon as possible. This was the biggest problem. Chapter 3842. Even if it was only due to the pressure of public opinion, the higher-ups of the soaring pavilion would definitely take action. At that time, the experts of the law enforcement hall would inevitably be involved. Not to mention the fact that everyone knew about the three heroes of the Nan clan. Once Nan Tianyong died, the other two heroes would definitely seek revenge. With so many people watching him, unless there was something wrong with Lin Air's brain, there was no way he would continue to swagger around the market. If he didn't take the initiative to show himself, it would be easier said than done. Seeing this, Yuzha carefully suggested, "Martial uncle, although this disciple doesn't know this Lin Second's exact background. According to what this disciple knows, he seems to be acquainted with the manager of the Hong merchant group in the inner street, Hong Zhong. We should be able to find out some useful information from him." "Oh, Martial nephew, are you sure? This loose cultivator actually knows the shopkeeper of the Hong Clan Merchant Association? That's not simple." Southern Sky Gate was slightly stunned. Unlike King Nan Shinyong, who had been in seclusion for the past few years, Southern Sky Gate was very clear about the weight of the Hong Clan Merchant Association. It was truly a colossus. Even if he was only the shopkeeper of the North Island branch, he would still be an incredible figure. For a mere loose cultivator like Lin Air to be acquainted with the shopkeeper of the Hong Clan Merchant Association, in the eyes of a knowledgeable person like Southern Sky Gate, this news was even more shocking than him instantly killing Nan Tianyong. Yuzha nodded in confirmation. "Although I don't know how close these two are, according to my speculation, Hong Zhong seems to have given Lin Air a Spirit Jade card recently." This conjecture was purely the conclusion that Yuzha came up with after much thought. Even though it was a little groundless, this person's brain was good, and he really guessed the whole story. The basis of his speculation was the 3 times he and Lin met in the inner street. The first time, the two of them took advantage of the opening day of the inner street and saw the Star Inkstone at the Hong Clan Merchant Association. The second time, the two of them met again on the opening day of the inner street a month later. At the same time, they rushed to the Hong Clan Merchant Association to compete for the Star Inkstone. From this, it could be seen that Lin definitely didn't have a Spirit Jade card on him, nor did he have the right to freely enter and exit the inner street. He would definitely buy the Star Inkstone before this happened. The third time, it was not the opening day of the inner street. Yuzha was able to enter the inner street completely because of the Spirit Jade card in the hands of his cheapskate master, Nan Tianyong. However, what surprised him the most was that he actually met Lin for the third time at the Hong Merchant Association. When the inner street was not open to the public, there were only 2 types of people who could freely enter and exit the inner street. One was the disciples of the 3 great pavilions whose status and strength were recognized by the market, and the other was the VIP who held the Spirit Jade card. Yuzha had been buried in the library for the past 3 years. However, he knew all the famous people in the 3 great pavilions like the back of his hand. At the very least, he had never seen Lin Air's face before. Otherwise, with his photographic memory, he would have recognized him the first time he saw him, since it was not the first one. The only possibility left was the second one. This Lin Air didn't have a Spirit Jade card, but for some reason, after buying the Star Inkstone from the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce, he suddenly had one. So naturally, Yuzha had this conjecture. Hong Zhong gave Lin Air a Spirit Jade card. Although this matter was a little unimaginable, he knew that Lin Air had something like the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill in his hands. Businessmen always liked rare goods, so it was not difficult to understand why Hong Zhong gave Lin Air a Spirit Jade card, because he thought highly of him. Spirit Jade card? Interesting, even someone at the level of number 3 doesn't have the right to receive a Spirit Jade card. If I remember correctly, this guy went to find Boss to borrow his Spirit Jade card a few days ago? Southern Sky Gate asked with a cold laugh. That's right, the Spirit Jade card can bring another person into the inner street. Without this Spirit Jade card, we wouldn't have met Lin Air this time. Yuzha nodded. Oomph. A piece of trash who can't even get a Spirit Jade card. If he lives, he will only bring shame to our Nan clan. All right, Martial Nephew, did you find eldest brother's spirit jade card on his body? If boss comes back and finds out that his spirit jade card is gone, he will go crazy. Southern Sky Gate frowned. On the 5 great islands of Heaven stage, the spirit jade card was the best proof of a person's status. Even the strongest person would value it. Even the boss of the Nan clan's 3 heroes was no exception. Hearing this, Yuja's heart tightened. The spirit jade card that Nan Tianyong borrowed from boss was now in his hands along with the other treasures that were gathered from Nan Tianyong's body. Although he knew that without the owner's chi, even if he had the spirit jade card in his hands, he wouldn't be able to use a single bit of it. This was because to use the spirit jade card, one had to input chi and pass through the joint formation of the Merchant Guild. But Yuja couldn't resist the temptation. The owner of this spirit jade card was the boss of the Nan clan's 3 heroes. The number of spirit jades on it was enough to dazzle any cultivator. Yuja was no exception. It was rumored that as long as he could find the cooperation of a top merchant guild or someone from the merchant guild, even if it was someone else's spirit jade card, there was a way to extract all the spirit jades from it. Therefore, even though he knew that it was dangerous to keep this spirit jade card, Yuja still couldn't bear to throw it away. The spirit jades in this spirit jade card were enough to surpass the value of all the treasures he found on Nan Tianyong's body. This was something he could rely on in the future. How could he throw it away? Reporting to Martial Uncle, Lin Air's killing move was too shocking. Many things on Master's body were lost. After that, it attracted a lot of onlookers from the nearby market. I couldn't care too much and could only steal Master's body. As for Martial Uncle's spirit jade card, I don't know who picked it up in the chaos. Although Yuja was panicking, he didn't show it on his face and replied calmly. There were truths and lies in his words. Even a smart person like Southern Sky Gate wouldn't be able to determine the truth in such a short amount of time, unless he suspected Yuja from the beginning and directly searched his body or his cave. Unfortunately, although Southern Sky Gate didn't have a good relationship with Nan Tianyong, he still admired Nan Tianyong's disciple, Yuja. Chapter 3843. Now that Nan Tianyong had turned into a corpse, Yuja had lost his only support. With his intelligence, he definitely knew what to do in order to survive in the Soaring Sky Pavilion. What the Southern Sky Gate needed to do was simple. They needed to test if Yuja was loyal enough, then decide if they wanted to take him in. If that's the case, then Martial Nephew, get someone to put up a notice in the market. As for whether or not we can get it back, we'll let the boss worry about it when he comes back. The Southern Sky Gate didn't care too much about it. After all, even if they tried their best to get it back, it wouldn't do them any good. They were just mentioning it out of convenience. Yes, disciple understands. Yuja nodded immediately. The Southern Sky Gate's words were exactly what he wanted. Otherwise, if the other party really wanted to find the spiritual jade card, it would be a huge problem. The Southern Sky Gate paused for a moment, then said, "Then we'll take care of the spiritual jade card. As for Lin Air, since Martial Nephew is sure that he is related to Hong Zhong, it seems like I'll have to pay a visit to the Hong Merchant Guild." Although the Southern Sky Gate didn't care about Nan Tianyong's humiliation at the Hong Merchant Guild, as one of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, the news would naturally reach his ears through the mouths of the surrounding flatterers. The Southern Sky Gate's attitude towards this was completely disdainful. As for the 3rd brother, Nan Tianyong, he was even more of an idiot in his eyes. A mere peak late-stage foundation establishment cultivator dared to provoke the Hong Merchant Guild. If that wasn't idiot, then what was? Not to mention Nan Tianyong, even the Southern Sky Gate, whose strength and status were above him, didn't dare to underestimate the enormous Hong Merchant Guild. Nan Tianyong used his strength and status to force the Hong Merchant Guild? What a joke. Saying that he was ignorant was already praising him. He really had a hole in his brain. The Southern Sky Gate was well aware of the enormous power of the Hong Merchant Guild and was extremely afraid of it. However, it wasn't to the point where they didn't dare to have any ideas. No matter what, he was also the 2nd brother of the Nan clan's 3 heroes. Now that the eldest brother wasn't here, If he didn't care about the death of the third brother, Nan Tianyong, it would be extremely damaging to his reputation. Although the South Heaven Gate was 100 or even 1,000 times smarter than a simple-minded person like Nan Tianyong, he could not help but place great importance on his reputation. Even though he had no interest in the idiot Nan Tianyong hanging in the hands of others, he had no choice but to step forward for the sake of his reputation. What's more, she was different from him, who had a cold temperament. The eldest of the three heroes of the Nan clan, Nan Tianba, was very protective of his own people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lent something as precious as the Spirit Jade card to Nan Tianyong without any hesitation. Once Nan Tianba returned and found out that his younger brother was indifferent to the death of third brother Nan Tianyong, the Southern Sky Gate could not imagine what kind of rage they would face at that time. A smart person like the Southern Sky Gate would never be so stupid as to threaten him like Nan Tianyong. The reason why he had the confidence to pay a visit to the Hong Merchant Guild was because there was a detail in Yuja's words. Lin Air was not valued by the entire Hong Merchant Guild. He was merely valued by Hong Zhong, the manager of the North Island branch of the Hong Merchant Guild. Although it was only a few words different, the meaning behind it was completely different. If this Lin Air, he was an important customer valued by the entire Hong Merchant Guild, then even if the Southern Sky Gate had 10 times the guts, he would never dare to go to the Hong Merchant Guild and threaten them to hand over Lin Air's information. As the second most famous merchant guild on the 5 islands of Heaven rank, the Hong Merchant Guild was extremely protective of their customers. Especially the important customers that they valued, they were always extremely protective of them. If Lin Air was this kind of customer, then forget about the Southern Sky Gate. Even if the 3 great pavilions of the North Island came forward to pressure the Hong Merchant Guild, it would be useless. Although businessmen pursued profits and would often resort to unscrupulous means, the main reason why the Hong Merchant Guild was able to become the colossus it was today was because of its reputation. Without a strong reputation, it would be impossible to become a top chamber of commerce. To build such a degree of reputation, it would require years of operation. This process was very long and difficult, but it was very easy to destroy such a strong reputation. As long as they sold information about a customer, even if it was just the simplest identity, once it was spread out, it would be enough to destroy the strong reputation that had been accumulated for thousands of years. Everyone who joined the Hong Merchant Guild, even the lowest manservant, had to go through all kinds of brainwashing every day. The most basic and most important rule was to protect the Hong Merchant Guild's reputation with their lives. However, if Lin Air was only valued by Hong Zhong, then it would be much easier to deal with. Where there were people, there would be conflicts. Even within the Hong Merchant Guild, it was not a monolithic block. If the higher-ups of the Hong Merchant Guild's Middle Island headquarters spoke, then Hong Zhong's position as the representative of the Hong Merchant Guild on the North Island would naturally be gone. The Southern Sky Gate knew very well that if they wanted to pry out Lin Air's identity from Hong Zhong, the first step was to separate Hong Zhong from the Hong Merchant Guild. The Southern Sky Gate did not dare to challenge the Hong Merchant Guild, but if it was only Hong Zhong, then there was still a chance to threaten them. May I ask, Marshal Uncle, when are we going to the Hong Merchant Guild? Although Yuja did not know what the Southern Sky Gate was planning, he still dared to say something like going to the Hong Merchant Guild even after knowing that Nan Tianyong had suffered a setback. It was obvious that he had something to rely on and his confidence. There's no rush. Let's talk about it in 2 days. Marshal Nephew, you should first send out the notice to search for Boss's spiritual jade card. I need to prepare something and, at the same time, observe the situation. The Southern Sky Gate's expression was unfathomable. He then waved his hand at Yuja, indicating that he could leave. Yes, Marshal Uncle. Yuja did not say anything else and respectfully cowed out. He faced the Southern Sky Gate and carefully retreated to the door, then turned around and left. Looking at Yuja's back as he left, the Southern Sky Gate thoughtfully rubbed his chin and said to himself with a chuckle, "This kid sure pretends to be obedient, but if he wants to win my favor, he's still far from it." 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye. The supervising deacon, Nan Tianyong, was killed in an instant near the market. After 3 days of brewing, this matter had become known to everyone. Not only the disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, but even the disciples of the other 3 pavilions were discussing this matter during their leisure time. Chapter 3844. The market was a place where good and bad mixed together. Not only were there a large number of disciples from the 3 pavilions, but there were also a large number of rogue cultivators. Chapter If the murderer was a disciple from the 3 pavilions, then it would not be difficult to find the real culprit after a little investigation. However, if it was a rogue cultivator, then it would be very difficult to find the culprit. But what was surprising was that Nan Tianyong, a key figure in a key position, was killed in the territory of the 3 great pavilions. Everyone was just discussing it out of boredom, and it didn't cause any strong cries. No one deliberately created public opinion to pressure the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions to find the real culprit as soon as possible. Nan Tianyong, the supervisor of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, had a poor relationship with others. Because of the widespread attention, the higher-ups of the Soaring Sky Pavilion had already come forward to investigate this matter. The nature of this matter could not be said to be bad. If they did not even care about Nan Tianyong, a person with a high status, being killed in his own territory, then where would the prestige of the Soaring Sky Pavilion be? How would they be able to convince the public in the future? However, although the law enforcement hall had registered this matter, they did not make any targeted big movements. It was rather cold for a period of time. After everyone had forgotten about it, they would put it on the shelf. In a world of cultivation that was filled with fighting and killing, the death of a person was a common occurrence. Unless it was a massacre like the one in the Highwater Manor where thousands of people died, it would affect the interests of certain people. Only then would a large number of people be involved. This time, if Nan Tianyong's identity as the supervisor of the Soaring Sky Pavilion was not a little sensitive, the higher-ups would not pay attention to him at all. If he died, then he died. There was nothing to be surprised about. However, under the premise that there was no special greeting from the higher-ups, the law enforcement hall was just going through the motions. In the words of the current law enforcement hall master, Ram Jia, the law enforcement hall was not bored enough to seek justice for the weak. Only the big figures of the big forces. That was the real target they needed to keep an eye on. In the eyes of most ordinary cultivators, Nan Tianyong was already a high and mighty figure. However, in the eyes of Ram Jia, he was no different from ordinary people at the bottom. He was just a lowly ant, and there was no need to waste energy on him. Sure enough, if I want to give boss a satisfactory explanation, I'll have to do it myself. The South Heaven Gate had expected this to happen. After being in the Soaring Sky Pavilion for so long, it was impossible for them to not know what the authorities and the disciplinary hall were like. Then he would have wasted his time. However, he did not wait in vain for the past 3 days. After all, apart from observing the situation, he had to prepare a trump card if he wanted to personally make a trip to the Hong Chamber of Commerce. And now, he had been waiting for this trump card. After calling Yu Zhe, the Southern Heavenly Gate immediately headed to the market square. However, he was different from Nan Tianyong. He had his own Spirit Jade card, so bringing Yu Zhe in was not a problem. Arriving in front of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the Southern Heavenly Gate didn't say a word. With a cold expression, he strode in, while Yu Zhe followed closely behind. The manservant at the entrance of the Hong Chamber of Commerce immediately sensed that something was wrong. Then, he glanced at Yu Zhe. He immediately understood. Although he didn't know who the Southern Sky Gate was, Yu Zhe had been coming to the Hong Chamber of Commerce quite a few times recently. Moreover, the recent disturbances were all because of him. If the manservant still couldn't recognize him, then it would be a waste of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's painstaking training. "Where's your shopkeeper?" The Southern Heavenly Gate did not even look at the manservant. He curled his lips and said condescendingly. The 3 heroes of the Nan family were used to being arrogant. Even as smart as he was no exception. He had never been nice to his subordinates. Furthermore, even if it was for the purpose of coming here today, he had to be arrogant. Disregarding everything else, he had to first suppress the other party with his aura. Otherwise, with the cunning nature of these merchants, there was no way he could pry the truth out of their mouths. To be honest, after seeing the Southern Heavenly Gate's behavior, Yuja, who was following behind him, was somewhat panicking. Not only did his cheap master, Nan Tianyong, suffer from the terror of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest chamberlains, even he himself had personally experienced it. Although it was only for a short moment, it was enough to make him tremble in fear. Although the Southern Heavenly Gate was very strong, even stronger than Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, Yuja did not think that he would be able to gain any advantage over the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest chamberlains. Even if he was not inferior to the other party in a one-on-one fight, it was not like the other party only had one guest chamberlain. Although he was on tenterhooks, Yuja knew that he had no right to criticize the Southern Heavenly Gate. Furthermore, the Southern Heavenly Gate was not a simple person. If he did not have someone to rely on, he would not do something so stupid. After a while, the two of them were invited to a private room on the second floor by the manservant. This time, to Yuja's surprise, the shopkeeper Hong Zhong, who was always polite to everyone, did not stand up to welcome them. "May I know what the two of you have come for?" Hong Zhong sat on a wooden armchair and drank a cup of high-quality tea while looking at the two of them. He said calmly, "The Hong Chamber of Commerce sincerely welcomes any guest. However, if you are here to cause trouble, then forgive me for not seeing you off. Don't ask for trouble." As a businessman, Hong Zhong had always welcomed guests from all over the world with a smile. However, he had never been kind to guests who had obviously come with ill intentions. As one of the top Chamber of Commerce on the 5 Great Islands, if the Hong Chamber of Commerce was too arrogant, people would say that they were bullying their customers. However, Hong Zhong knew that he had to be tough sometimes. He even had to make a show of his power every once in a while. Otherwise, if he only knew how to be patient, it would make people think that he was weak and easy to bully. They would then climb all over him and cause him endless trouble. It might even affect the impression other customers had of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, which would make business difficult. In Hong Zhong's eyes, since the two people in front of him had obviously come with ill intentions, there was no need for him to be polite. It was already very polite of him to send them off with tea. If the two of them were still so stubborn, he would have no choice but to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. As for trouble, the Southern Heavenly Gate glanced at Hong Zhong. A mere slave of a merchant dared to be so rude to him. He could not help but feel angry. He immediately laughed coldly and said, "The Hong Chamber of Commerce is quite famous. However, I'm very curious. Is this how you usually treat your guests?" Chapter 38:45. Of course, the reason why the executive of the Hong Chamber of Commerce gave him the spiritual jade card was mostly because of the big shot of the Nan clan. However, Southern Sky Gate rarely visited the Hong Chamber of Commerce on the North Island. Instead, he was roped in by another big merchant with a lot of money. After all, with his position in the soaring pavilion, as long as he was roped in, he could reap huge benefits. There are good and bad guests. If you're a good guest, the Hong Chamber of Commerce will naturally treat you with respect. If you're a bad guest, then there's nothing much to say. In the world of cultivation, the strong are respected. I'm sure you're aware of this, Hong Zhong said calmly. The strong are respected? Southern Sky Gate's eyes flickered. He was surprised to find out that he couldn't see through Hong Zhong's strength. He couldn't rule out the possibility that Hong Zhong was using some kind of secret skill to hide his strength. However, logically speaking, if he couldn't see through Hong Zhong's strength, it meant that Hong Zhong's strength was higher than his. No wonder he was the manager of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's North Island branch. He couldn't be underestimated. Southern Sky Gate's heart trembled, but he didn't plan to give up. After all, he came to the Hong Chamber of Commerce today with ample preparation. It seems that in your eyes, I'm a bad guest. However, do you know who I am? Southern Sky Gate snorted and said disdainfully. Compared to the third brother, Nan Tianyong, Southern Sky Gate was not only stronger, but his position in the soaring pavilion was also much higher. Nan Tianyong's position as the supervising deacon would at most cause people to feel respectful toward him. However, his position in the South Heaven Gate was definitely a hot topic. Not only would people feel respectful toward him, he would also have access to a huge amount of cultivation resources. If anyone was able to befriend him, it would bring them great benefits. Almost half of the merchants in the inner street of the market took the initiative to befriend him. It could even be said that they were trying to curry favor with Southern Sky Gate. There were many people who wanted to rope him in with a lot of money. However, none of these merchants was the flagship business giant of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, Southern Sky Gate had long harbored a grudge against the Hong Chamber of Commerce, or strictly speaking, the Hong Chamber of Commerce's North Island branch. Therefore, the South Heaven Gate had purposely paid a visit this time. On the surface, it seemed like it was for Nan Tianyong's sake, but in reality, it was possible that they were trying to use the opportunity to teach the South Heaven Gate a lesson. The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that Hong Zhong dared to be so rude to him because he didn't know his identity. Otherwise, any merchant who knew his identity would treat him like the god of wealth. Why would they put on such a cold face? Unexpectedly, Hong Zhong didn't even raise his head as he said, ranked second among the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Soaring Pavilion's eldest senior brother, Southern Heavenly Gate. How did you know? The South Heaven Gate's expression changed instantly. If the other party did not know his identity, it would be understandable for him to show such a cold face. But on the premise that he knew his identity as the first senior brother steward of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he still dared to treat him like this. This was completely unexpected. Soaring Sky Pavilion's eldest senior brother in charge of the new Blue Cloud Pavilion didn't sound much different from Meng Jiawang, who was the eldest senior brother in charge of the new disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. However, the difference in status between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. As the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Meng Jiawang could only manage a dozen or so new disciples of the Blue Cloud Pavilion. Most of them hadn't even reached the foundation establishment stage. However, as the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, apart from the Golden Core stage, Southern Heavenly Gate was in charge of all the inner disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. He had a lot of power and was in charge of a lot of cultivation resources. It was enough to make countless people envious. The status and power of the two could not be compared at all. Even Hu Yinfeng, the pavilion master of the Welcoming Pavilion, a person with real power in charge of a department, did not dare to be careless in front of the Southern Heavenly Gate. Not to mention a mere Meng Jiawang. Of course, not all the department masters would pay any attention to the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Southern Heavenly Gate. The reason why Hu Yinfeng acted this way was because the Welcoming Pavilion was ranked last among all the departments. If it was the hall master of a top-notch department like the Law Enforcement Hall, a powerful person like Ramjia would not even look at the Southern Heavenly Gate in the eye. Even so, in the eyes of the shopkeepers in the market, the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Southern Heavenly Gate, was still a hot commodity. He was a god of wealth worth spending a lot of money to win over. No matter which shop he walked into, he would be treated with the utmost respect. Even his own father would not be able to receive such treatment. As long as he bribed the Southern Heavenly Gate, he would take care of his shop's business when he purchased resources for the disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion in the future. The profit would be an astronomical figure, enough to make any businessman go crazy with envy. As a shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Hong Zhong had never paid any attention to the Southern Heavenly Gate. Now that he had taken the initiative to come to the Southern Heavenly Gate, he still dared to treat him so coldly despite knowing the Southern Heavenly Gate's identity. With such a huge gap, it was no wonder that the Southern Heavenly Gate lost his composure. The fact that Hong Zhong could become the shopkeeper of the branch meant that he was a businessman through and through. How could a businessman treat the god of wealth like this? Looking at the Southern Heavenly Gate's shocked expression, Hong Zhong said with a faint smile, "Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce is not an intelligence organization, it's basic to be observant when doing business on the North Island. No matter what, You are the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Is it strange that I recognized you? Being recognized by a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce like Hong Zhong was supposed to be proof of one's identity. However, when the Southern Heavenly Gate heard this, his face instantly turned gloomy. You know my identity, but you never paid any attention to me. Now that you've come to visit me, not only did you not offer me up, you even treated me so coldly. Isn't this a slap in the face? The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that with his identity, he could at least intimidate the other party a little. However, he did not expect to be slapped in the face by the other party in such a calm manner. The Southern Heavenly Gate felt his face burning with embarrassment. The Southern Heavenly Gate forced his expression and sneered, "Humph, you know my identity, but you still dare to treat me so coldly." It seems that shopkeeper Hong is very confident in himself. I wonder if the higher-ups of the Middle Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce will have any opinion on this. Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce was one of the few top chambers of commerce on the 5 Heavenly Islands, and Hong Zhong, as the shopkeeper of the branch, had enormous power on the North Island, if the higher-ups of the Middle Island knew that he had acted on impulse and harmed the Hong Chamber of Commerce's interests, his position as the branch shopkeeper would probably come to an end. Chapter 3846. In the eyes of any merchant befriending Southern Sky Gate, a person with real power in the Soaring Pavilion would bring them great benefits. Even Hong Zhong had the same idea in the beginning, but after secretly observing Southern Sky Gate's character, he immediately gave up on the idea. This article was written by. First, the reason was simple. Southern Sky Gate was a greedy person, and it could even be said that he was greedy beyond measure. Perhaps after befriending him, they could earn a huge profit of tens of thousands of spiritual jades through his power, but the price would be at least 60%, or even more. Although the merchant could still earn 40% of the profit, Hong Zhong, as a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, had always looked at the person when choosing a partner, not the profit in front of him. Only by choosing the right partner could there be long-term benefits. Otherwise, even if they got a little profit in front of them temporarily, they would definitely have to pay it back tenfold or even 100-fold in the future. This was Hong Zhong's experience after being in charge of the North Island branch of the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades. Therefore, even though Hong Zhong knew that Southern Sky Gate was very popular and was highly sought after by other shopkeepers, Hong Zhong had never thought of befriending him. Instead, he kept a respectful distance and ignored him. Seeing that Hong Zhong was so fearless, the Southern Sky Gate was stunned. Logically speaking, a shopkeeper like Hong Zhong who was sent out was most afraid of the higher-ups of Middle Island, because those people control their future and could decide their future development with a single word. However, Hong Zhong in front of him seemed to be very confident and fearless. Or did this guy not believe that he could talk to the higher-ups of Middle Island? Southern Sky Gate quickly came to a conclusion. The reason why Hong Zhong was so fearless was most likely the latter. After all, in the eyes of normal people, although he, the Southern Sky Gate, was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, and was considered to have a high position in the eyes of most people, he was not qualified to talk to the higher-ups of Middle Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Hong Zhong did not take his threats seriously. That was human nature. You don't believe that I have the ability? It doesn't matter. You'll be kneeling down and begging me later. The South Heaven Gate shook his head with a mocking expression and went straight to the point. I've come personally to ask about someone's background, shopkeeper Hong. I heard that you're quite close to the rogue cultivator, Lin Air, who killed my third brother. The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that after it said this, the other party would definitely retort fiercely, saying something stupid like protecting customer information was the lifeline of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. But unexpectedly, Hong Zhong's reaction was completely different from what he had expected. Hong Zhong didn't overreact or even say a word. He just picked up the teacup. That was all. The meaning of serving tea to send off the guest could not be more obvious. Regarding this question, Hong Zhong, who had always been amiable, did not even have the interest to say a word. He directly served tea to send the guest off. Even as South Heaven Gate's face flushed red with anger. He didn't even say a word. This kind of silent response was even more infuriating than malicious words of ridicule and ridicule. Shopkeeper Hong. I'll call you Shopkeeper Hong for the last time. I advise you to be sensible and cooperate with me. Otherwise, don't blame me for not giving you a chance if you don't want face. The South Heaven Gate forcefully suppressed his anger and said, although he had everything he could rely on for this trip, but if it wasn't necessary, he didn't want to completely fall out with Hong Zhong. After all, the Hong Chamber of Commerce was one of the few top chambers of commerce. If he could make the other party cooperate with him obediently, not only would he be able to obtain more benefits, it would also be more flawless. Therefore, the purpose of his trip today was to use Nan Tianyong's death as an opportunity to demonstrate his power to Hong Zhong. He didn't really want to cause trouble, nor did he want to completely fall out with the other party. I'm giving you face, but you don't want it. Hong Zhong glanced at him in surprise, and then said with a smile that was not a smile, this old man should be the one saying that. You are an uninvited guest, and this old man has already served tea to send you off, but you still have the cheek to stay here and refuse to leave. Who is the one who is being so shameless? After a pause, Hong Zhong said in a serious tone, since you were so thick-skinned, then I'll be frank. I can't help you with your request. Take care, I won't send you off. Old fart, I'm only showing you some respect because you're the manager of the Hong Merchant Group. But since you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then don't blame me for being rude. As the South Heaven Gate spoke, his aura suddenly rose to its peak. As if a storm was approaching, the surrounding tables and chairs began to tremble. The foundation completion stage? His strength is stronger than Nan Tianyong's, but he dares to cause trouble here with such little strength. Aren't you looking down on the Hong Chamber of Commerce? Hong Zhong said with a serious expression. Without Hong Zhong's command, the moment the South Heaven Gate unleashed his aura, there were already 4 powerful auras that were not any weaker than his. Some of them were even stronger than his, and had already locked onto him from a distance. If the South Heaven Gate continued to act like this, there was no doubt that he would repeat the same mistake as Nan Tianyong. Even if he was stronger than Nan Tianyong, his ending would definitely not be any better. If he, the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, were to be thrown out of the window like his younger brother, Nan Tianyong, then he would lose all his face. Even if he were to sit in this powerful position, it would be difficult for him to convince the others. He might even become a laughingstock. If a fight were to break out, the South Heaven Gate knew that he did not have the strength to defend against so many guest officials of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, seeing that the situation was not good, he had no choice but to use the trump card that he had carefully prepared for the past 3 days. Wait, if you want to fight against me, I advise you to read this letter first. The South Heaven Gate suddenly took out a letter from his pocket and threw it on the ground in front of him. Although the 4 guest officials did not show themselves, it was not difficult for them to read the contents of the letter with their strength. After the South Heaven Gate threw the letter, the 4 powerful auras dissipated at the same time, as if they had never appeared in the first place. As for Hong Zhong, after reading the contents of the letter, his expression turned gloomy for the first time. The letter was about Lin Air's identity. According to the letter, the South Heaven Gate was an important client recognized by the entire Hong Chamber of Commerce, while Lin Air was only a personal client of Hong Zhong. It was obvious which was more important. Chapter 38-47. If it was just a letter from an ordinary person in the headquarters, Hong Zhong would frown at most. He was a shopkeeper, and he had full authority to manage all the affairs of the Hong Chamber of Commerce in the North Island. Even the higher-ups of Middle Island couldn't tell him what to do. But the problem was that the person who signed the letter had the vital identity of the Hong Shadow Group's 4 Directions supervisor of the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce. His authority was sufficient to supervise the various branches of the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce, from the shopkeeper to the manservant. Once he was accused of malfeasance and investigated, then no matter how clean and honest Hong Zhong was, a layer of his skin would surely be peeled off, and he might even be stripped of his position as the branch's manager. His hard work of a few tens of years would be destroyed in a single day. Looking at Hong Zhong's gloomy face, Southern Sky Gate couldn't help but feel relieved. He even showed a long-lost complacency on his face. Since becoming the first senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, the South Heaven Gate had always maintained a poker face, especially not showing any superficial expression that would cause others to look down on him. However, at this moment, he could not help but feel proud of himself. From the moment he entered the room, he had been on the losing end. But now that he had revealed his trump card, the situation immediately turned around. Not only was Hong Zhong, the arrogant old man, shocked, even the four elusive foreign chamberlains were scared silent at this moment. Hong Ying's Four Directions supervisor was a ruthless character that everyone in the Hong Chamber of Commerce feared. Not only was Hong Zhong, who was a normal branch manager, afraid of him, but even guest experts, who had a high degree of freedom, had to give way in front of him. The treatment of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guardian foreign chamberlains was second to none in the industry. Even if the Four Directions supervising inspector did not have the authority to supervise the guardian foreign chamberlains in name, if they would be recorded by him and reported to the higher-ups, it would be hard to say if they could continue to be guardian foreign chamberlains in the future. The four guest experts who guarded the North Island branch were usually aloof and looked down on everyone in the North Island. Usually, they could be aloof and look down on anyone in the North Island. However, when it came to their personal interests, they had to keep silent. No matter what level of strength they were at, cultivators were always the most realistic group of people. How about it, old fart? Can you tell me the details of that bullshit Lin Air now? I don't have the patience to waste my time with you. Under the astonishment of the surrounding crowd, the Southern Heavenly Gate sat down on an armchair in the middle of the room as if there was no one else around, and leisurely crossed his legs. Everything was under his control. The Southern Heavenly Gate looked at the empty teapot at the side and snorted coldly at the servant at the door. Why aren't you serving me tea? You don't even have the slightest bit of eyesight. Why would the Hong Chamber of Commerce raise a bunch of trash like you? If it was before, the Southern Heavenly Gate would have been chased out by the four guest chamberlains. But now, no one dared to make a sound. Even Hong Zhong, the shopkeeper and the representative of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce in the North Island, just glanced at him, but he didn't say anything. The servant at the door shrunk his neck when he saw this. He had no choice but to sneak in and take the teapot away to prepare tea for the Southern Heavenly Gate. By the side, Yuzha could not help being secretly shocked when he saw this scene. The Hong's Chamber of Commerce was an unfathomable place. Now, with just a thin piece of paper, he managed to make the shopkeeper, Hong Zhong, and the four guest chamberlains speechless. Then, he turned the tables around and laughed. This uncle master of the Southern Heavenly Gate. As expected, he was a troublesome person that his cheap master could not compare to. However, at this moment, Yuzha could not help but feel secretly pleased when he saw Hong Zhong, the shopkeeper who did not even bother to hide his feelings, being defeated. Although the one who really stole the Starring Stone was Lin Air, Hong Zhong, who awarded the Starring Stone to Lin Air, was also on Yuzha's list of people to hate. However, because he was too weak, he could not find trouble with Hong Zhong even if he hated him. Now, Yuzha did not have to do it himself. The uncle master of the Southern Heavenly Gate had already done it for him. Looking at Hong Zhong, the so-called big shot of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce, being defeated, and the pitiful expression of him gritting his teeth in hatred, but not daring to resist, this feeling was simply too great. There were pros and cons to everything. The identity of the shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce brought Hong Zhong's status and power, but it also placed layers of restrictions on him. With this letter in front of him, if Hong Zhong said no, it would be equivalent to going against Hong Ying's Four Directions supervising inspector. Although the supervising inspector of the Four Directions didn't have the power to promote others, if they wanted to ruin someone's future, they could do it with just a word. Therefore, even a powerful shopkeeper like Hong Zhong didn't dare to underestimate them in the slightest. After all, this matter was related to one's future, so who would dare to take it lightly? After a while, the servant brought the tea to the door and carefully looked at the gloomy Hong Zhong. Seeing that Hong Zhong did not say anything, he could only bite the bullet and place the tea on the table beside the southern heavenly gate. Then he bowed and left. The southern heavenly gate poured himself a cup and took a sip in satisfaction. He then smirked at Hong Zhong and said, "You should have thought about what you should do. When you're under someone else's roof, you have no choice but to lower your head. You're already an old man. I don't think you need me to teach you that." The South Heaven Gate never doubted if Hong Zhong would cooperate with them. With a letter from the 4 supervising envoys of the Hong Ing group, it was equivalent to holding an imperial sword. The South Heaven Gate was not worried that Hong Zhong would not cooperate. Hong Zhong was a sensible man. If he did not have the tolerance to adapt to the situation, he would not have been able to become the shopkeeper of the North Island branch. Previously, according to the Southern Heavenly Gate's original plan, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not plan to use this letter to force Hong Zhong to submit. He originally thought that after Hong Zhong realized his power, he would take the initiative to cooperate with him in a big business deal. Although using someone's power to establish his authority would allow the other party to have a better understanding of his power, making it easier for him to gain a stronger position in the future, if he used his power to bully others too much, it might have the opposite effect. If Hong Zhong held a grudge and refused to cooperate with him, it would be as bad as going too far. However, Hong Zhong, this old man, did not take the face he was given and insisted on stepping on his face. There was nothing he could do to stop him, so he had no choice but to satisfy him. The Southern Heavenly Gate was not as impatient as he claimed to be. He did not seem to have any intention of rushing Hong Zhong. Judging from his expression, he seemed to be enjoying the feeling. Chapter 38-48. Seeing the South Heaven Gate's fearless expression after taking out the letter, Hong Zhong fell silent for a moment before he burst out laughing. "It seems like you're certain that I'm going to be the one in the bag." "Oh, isn't that so? Do you still dare to say no to me?" Southern Heavenly Gate sneered, not taking Hong Zhong's question seriously at all. Hong Ing Group's 4 directions inspectors were very important in the Hong Chamber of Commerce. He knew it clearly when he was in contact with the higher-ups of Middle Island. He easily defeated a branch manager, and not only was the other party unable to resist, he even had to kneel down and beg for mercy in order to save his life. With this letter guarding this place, even if Hong Zhong was given a few more guts, he would not dare to say half a word of no. Half a word? Hong Zhong raised an eyebrow and shook his head. "Then I'll have to disappoint you. I've never said more than half a word. However, I can tell you very clearly that you can leave now." In an instant, the atmosphere in the Hong Chamber of Commerce suddenly froze. Southern Heavenly Gate, who was confident that everything was under his control, had a subtle and even unbelievable expression on his face. "You don't understand what I said?" Hong Zhong looked at Southern Heavenly Gate's expression, his eyes filled with mockery and coldness. "Then, I might as well make it more straightforward and easier to understand. You can leave." "Huh? You old man, are you suffering from dementia?" Southern Heavenly Gate's face instantly turned red, and he couldn't help but say angrily, "Did you read what was written in the letter? How dare you ignore the words of the 4 directions inspectors of the Hong Ing Group and pretend not to see them?" Southern Heavenly Gate thought that after he deliberately mentioned the words that carried great weight in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, even if the other party wasn't as afraid as he imagined, he wouldn't be able to ignore them. However, after hearing his words, Hong Zhong still looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. He said calmly, "Of course I saw what he said, but so what? As the manager of the North Island branch, I have full authority to decide everything in the North Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Do you think that a mere 4 directions inspector can control me? Fuck." The Southern Sky Gate stared in bewilderment. Even though he was usually experienced and prudent, he couldn't help but curse at that moment. Even the other people in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, as well as the 4 elusive guest chamberlains, were shocked. One could clearly feel that their aura paused for a moment. They were obviously stunned. There was no problem with Hong Zhong's logic at all. The so-called four supervisors of the Hong Ing group only had the power to supervise the Four Directions branch and had no direct leadership power. Therefore, in theory, if Hong Zhong, the manager of the North Island branch, wanted to do something, the four supervisors really couldn't do anything. However, even if the other party couldn't control him, he was still in existence that could stifle his future. Hong Zhong wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Even a manservant at the bottom of the Hong Chamber of Commerce could see the stakes clearly. Hong Zhong, the veteran shopkeeper who had been guarding the North Island branch for decades, was not a match for Hong Zhong. How could he not see it? However, he still did so. This was really incomprehensible. Could it be that shopkeeper Hong didn't even have this little bit of slyness? Just because of Lin Air, he let his emotions affect his decisions to the point of going against a four-direction supervisor? Isn't this a little too illogical? Sir, you're still lingering here. Looks like you're going to take the hard way instead of the soft way. Hong Zhong's expression remained the same. He picked up his teacup again and smiled. For guests, can you please send these two evil guests off for me? After hearing that, the Southern Sky Gate and Yuge's expressions instantly changed. After coming back to their senses, the Southern Sky Gate hurriedly threatened. This old man has gone crazy. I like to see who else will go crazy with him. From the Southern Sky Gate's point of view, even if Hong Zhong had gone crazy and ignored the Four Directions supervisor's threat, the other people, including the four guest chamberlains, wouldn't go crazy with him. Don't forget, when it came to personal interests, cultivators were always the most realistic group of people. Unexpectedly, after a brief pause, the four powerful auras once again loomed over his head without hesitation. It was obvious that between Hong Zhong and the Southern Sky Gate, the four guest chamberlains had already made their choice. The four guest chamberlains appeared at the same time, not giving the Southern Sky Gate any chance to resist. They immediately surrounded him and used the same method they used against Nan Tianyong last time, tossing them out of the window on the second floor. As it wasn't the opening day of the inner street, there weren't many people on the street. However, when two living people were suddenly tossed out of the window, and one of them was an important figure like the Southern Sky Gate, the inner street instantly burst into an uproar. Being pointed at by the crowd with mocking gazes, not only was the authority of the South Heaven Gate embarrassed, even a nobody like Yuja felt ashamed and was too ashamed to face the others. This time, the two of them finally experienced what Nan Tianyong had felt. The only difference was that Nan Tianyong was alone, while the two of them had teamed up to embarrass themselves. Damned old man. The Southern Sky Gate looked at the calm Hong Zhong at the window on the second floor and couldn't help but grit his teeth in hatred, his face burning. When he first found out that his third brother, Nan Tianyong, had been thrown out of the Hong Merchant Guild, he had been full of disdain and disdain. He didn't expect that when he was the one being thrown out, and had made ample preparations beforehand, he still couldn't escape from the same embarrassing situation. How could he endure this? As the eldest senior brother who was in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he was thrown out of the street from the second floor without being able to resist and was ridiculed by so many passers-by. Today, the Southern Sky Gate had completely embarrassed him for the rest of his life. As for Yu Zhe, a nobody like him, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. This senior uncle of his was so amazing. He had pressured Hong Zhong and the others to the point where they couldn't even breathe, but he still ended up in such an embarrassing situation. Not only did he fail to find out more about Lin Air's background, but he had also embarrassed himself. This was really a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. The three heroes of the Nan family were so famous, but in the end, when they went up against a giant like the Hong Merchant Guild, it was their third brother and second brother who were thrown out of the street to be humiliated and ridiculed. Yuja finally understood that they were never on the same level. Chapter 38-49. Both of them were smart people. No matter how much they couldn't swallow their anger today, they could only grit their teeth and swallow it. Otherwise, with their strength, if they really fought with so many experts from the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the outcome wouldn't be as simple as losing face. Just as Southern Heavenly Gate and Yu were planning to escape, a piece of paper floated in front of them. It was the letter that Southern Heavenly Gate had previously shown to intimidate Hong Zhong. The letter was signed by Hong Ing Group's Four Directions supervising envoy. You want to threaten this old man with just a piece of lousy paper? Do the two of you think my Hong Chamber of Commerce is too simple and dirty? You should take this kind of trash back and read it slowly. Hong Zhong stood by the window on the second floor and smiled faintly. Take care, I won't see you out. The crowd of passers-by cheered loudly. Hong Zhong had been operating in the industry of the market for several decades, and he had always been kind to everyone. He had a good reputation, and his relationships with people were extraordinary. It was not something that a so-called important figure like the Southern Heavenly Gate could compare to. You got guts. Old man, remember this. I'll settle this score with you sooner or later. I want to see how long you can be a shopkeeper of a branch. Southern Sky Gate gritted his teeth and cursed. Then, amidst the laughter of the crowd, he and Yu covered their faces and fled in a sorry state. Looking at the backs of the two fleeing figures, Hong Zhong smiled faintly and muttered to himself, How long can I be a shopkeeper? Of course, I can be a shopkeeper for as long as I want. Old Hong, you've lost so much face this time. That guy definitely won't let this go. You have to be prepared. One of the guest experts reminded him. If everything went according to plan, the South Heaven Gate would surely contact the supervising envoys of the Four Directions after they returned. Hong Zhong's actions would surely incur their displeasure, which would bring him some trouble. Hong Zhong shook his head indifferently. It doesn't matter. There's no need to worry too much about a clown. If they want to scare me with a mere letter, the Nan family's three heroes are too naive. Hong Ing Group, supervising inspector? He. When the guest experts heard this, they looked at each other and laughed. Their faces were full of mockery. There was nothing wrong with the Southern Sky Gate's logic in using Hong Ying's Four Directions supervising envoys to threaten a branch manager. Normally speaking, no branch manager of the Hong Chamber of Commerce would dare to ignore such a threat. If it was anyone else, the Southern Heavenly Gate would have completed their mission perfectly. However, the Southern Sky Gate had made a fatal mistake. Hong Zhong's position in the Hong Merchant Association was never as simple as a shopkeeper of a branch. He had another, more important identity. His surname was Hong. If Hong Zhong did not mention this identity, the four foreign chamberlains would have almost forgotten about it. Now that he thought about it, he understood what Hong Zhong had done just now. However, just because they can't touch me doesn't mean they'll give up. I'm a little worried about that little brother Lin Air now. There was a hint of worry between Hong Zhong's brows. After the previous few encounters, he had already seen the incredible potential in Lin Yi. This potential was something that he had never seen before. As a businessman, Hong Zhong's intuition told him that this Lin Yi was the rare commodity he had been waiting for. If he missed this opportunity, he might not have another one like this in his life. Hong Zhong was very clear that no matter how the Southern Sky Gate tried to provoke the Four Directions supervising envoys, they would never be able to threaten him. However, Lin Yi was different, but that Lin Air was different. Even if he could defeat Yu Zhe, and even if he could use that unknown but shocking killing move to instantly kill Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage Juji expert, in the end, his potential was far from being developed. His strength was still very weak. If the South Heaven Gate took the opportunity to blow the matter up, forcing the authorities of the Soaring Sky Pavilion to pressure the enforcement hall to dig Lin Air out, it would be hard to tell what would happen to him. After all, with his current strength, there was no way he could withstand the storm. In this situation, even if Hong Zhong wanted to help Lin Yi, there was nothing he could do. Just like the Southern Sky Gate and Yu Zhe, he knew nothing about Lin Yi's background. On the other hand, after suffering such a huge loss of the Hong Merchant Guild, the Southern Sky Gate would not let it go so easily. The first thing he did when he returned to the Soaring Pavilion was to write a letter to the Four Directions supervising inspector of the Hong Ing Group in the Middle Island. There was no need to exaggerate. As long as he truthfully described what happened at the Hong Merchant Guild today, he would not need to intervene. The more powerful a person was, the more they valued their reputation. If Hong Zhong did not take his letter seriously, it was the same as not taking him seriously. Even if the Southern Sky Gate did not try to sow discord, the Four Directions supervising inspector of the Middle Island would definitely attack Hong Zhong for the sake of his reputation. The second thing was to make a big deal out of the death of the third brother, Nan Tianyong. Since Hong Zhong was unwilling to cooperate, then if he wanted to force Lin Er, the individual cultivator of unknown origin, out, he had to borrow the power of the law enforcement hall. However, the enforcement hall was one of the top departments among the three great pavilions of the North Island. Its power was not to be underestimated. Not to mention the Southern Sky Gate's eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion. Even the elders with weaker power would not be able to influence it. In the entire Soaring Pavilion, the number of people that could force the hall master of the enforcement hall, Ramjia, to lower his head could be counted on one hand. The person that the Southern Sky Gate was looking for this time was the most powerful one among them, the master of the Soaring Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua. The Southern Sky Gate had carefully considered the reason why he was looking for Shanghai Tianhua. Shanghai Tianhua was the undisputed leader of the Soaring Pavilion. Now that his third brother, the supervising deacon of the Soaring Pavilion, had been killed, it was normal for him, the second brother, to seek justice from the first senior brother. No one else would be able to find fault with him. Shanghai Tianhua, the first senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, was definitely a super expert that stood at the top of the pyramid of the North Island. Even though the Southern Sky Gate was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, it was not easy for him to meet with him. Fortunately, the Southern Sky Gate was not the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion for nothing. Due to his position, he would often interact with the higher-ups. Although he did not speak much with them, as time went by, he was able to figure out the whereabouts of these people. Chapter 3850. Hualan Residence was located in the core area of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was not a cave that was specifically used for cultivation, but a man-made loft. It was where Shanghai Tianhua lived his daily life. It was named Hualan Residence because there were only two people living here. Both of them had taken a word from their names to form the name of the residence. The word Hua was taken from Shanghai Tianhua, while the word Lan was taken from the eldest young mistress, Shangwan Laner. Although the security was extremely tight, the Southern Heavenly Gate managed to enter the Hualan residence in the end by relying on his identity as the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. At this moment, Shanghai Tianhua was personally teaching Shangwan Laner how to cultivate. To be able to receive personal tutelage from a top-tier powerhouse like Shangwan Tianhua, in the eyes of any cultivator, that was a blessing that could not be obtained in several lifetimes. Alas, comparisons were odious. This sort of treatment that others could only dream of, but in the eyes of the Shangwan First Miss, it was not attractive at all. Just like now, when the Southern Heavenly Gate was led into the residence by the guards, eldest young Mistress Shangwan was fooling around with the little curly bear. As for Shanghai Tianhua, the dignified Lord Pavilion Master, he was currently sitting at the side with his arms crossed and a bitter smile on his face. He looked like he was having a headache. Due to the distance between them and the fact that his children were not by his side, Shangwan Laner, his only granddaughter, was definitely the apple of Shanghai Tianhua's eye. Even if he did not spoil her, he still doted on her. Under normal circumstances, unless something serious happened, Shanghai Tianhua would stay in the Hualan residence after dark. Not only did he enjoy the company of his family, it was also convenient for him to supervise Shangwan Laner's cultivation. However, there was one thing that gave the Lord Pavilion Master a headache. Although Shangwan Laner had great talent, she had never been interested in cultivation. Even with him, her grandfather, watching over her, it was useless. She was still half-hearted and distracted. Otherwise, if eldest young Mistress Shangwan really wanted to improve with her great talent, coupled with Shanghai Tianhua's personal guidance, he had probably already become an outstanding figure of the Soaring Sky Pavilion's new generation. Seeing the southern heavenly gate enter, Shangwan Laner immediately said excitedly, "Grandpa, someone is looking for you. Let's call it a day." Shanghai Tianhua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Stop here? Little Lon, you haven't even officially started cultivating today, right? How could you say such a thing?" Hee hee. Shangwan Laner stuck out her tongue cutely, and the little curly bear next to her also made a face. Shanghai Tianhua had no choice but to give up. The Southern Heavenly Gate was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Shanghai Tianhua could not ignore it. It could not be helped that Shangwan Laner took the opportunity to skip this lesson. Seeing that Shanghai Tianhua had noticed him, the Southern Heavenly Gate hurriedly knelt on the ground and said respectfully, "Disciple Southern Heavenly Gate pays respect to the Pavilion Master." In front of Shanghai Laner, his only granddaughter, Shanghai Tianhua, was just an amiable old man. However, in front of outsiders, he was the top figure standing at the peak of the entire North Island, an out-and-out super powerful big shot. Even if he deliberately restrained his aura, he still made people feel that he was powerful and domineering, making them tremble as if they were walking on thin ice. Shanghai Tianhua waved his hand, signaling the Southern Heavenly Gate to stand up and speak. He said, "What do you want?" It was just a casual question, but because Shanghai Tianhua had regained his majesty, the Southern Heavenly Gate, an expert in the Peak Foundation establishment realm, was frightened from the bottom of his heart. He felt that if he relaxed even a little, he would immediately be drowned in the other party's inadvertent pressure. He held back every bit of aura in his body and stood up from the ground quietly. The Southern Heavenly Gate then answered carefully, "Pavilion Master, I'm here for my third brother, Nan Tianyong." Shanghai Tianhua slightly raised his eyebrows. Although Nan Tianyong was an unimportant person in his eyes, and he would not normally pay attention to him, as the Pavilion Master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, even the slightest movement in the Soaring Sky Pavilion would not escape his eyes. As the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Nan Tianyong was killed in the territory of the three pavilions. Even if no one deliberately added fuel to the fire, it had caused quite a stir in the past few days. It was impossible for Shanghai Tianhua not to know about it. Pavilion Master is wise. My third brother, as the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, was killed by an outsider rogue cultivator in the market. If we don't catch the culprit as soon as possible, I'm afraid it will negatively affect the reputation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. The Southern Heavenly Gate said cautiously. Even someone as shrewd as him did not dare to play any tricks in front of a top-tier powerhouse like Shangwan Tianhua. All he could do was carefully choose his words to express his intentions. Any other actions would be unnecessary, and he would be trying to act smart and courting death. Shanghai Tianhua nodded his head slightly. There was nothing wrong with the Southern Heavenly Gate's words. If the matter continued to be delayed, although it would not cause any trouble, it would still damage the reputation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. That's right, but didn't the disciplinary hall take care of it? Nan Tianyong is the supervising deacon, which means he's one of the disciplinary hall's people. They won't just ignore it. Shanghai Tianhua said calmly. It was true that Nan Tianyong was the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, but at the end of the day, he was still a member of the disciplinary hall. The Southern Heavenly Gate's heart sank when he heard this. Nan Tianyong was indeed one of the disciplinary hall's people. Normally, the disciplinary hall would attach great importance to the death of one of their own. However, the truth was that although Nan Tianyong's death had been filed, the entire disciplinary hall was just going through the motions. They did not make any big moves. Otherwise, with the terrifying power of the disciplinary hall, they would have dug out the rogue cultivator Lin Air in the past few days. How could there be no movement like now? In the end, whether the disciplinary hall would take Nan Tianyong's death seriously depended on Ram Jie's attitude. If Ram Jie gave the order, then even if they had to dig 3 feet into the North Island, the disciplinary hall would still have a way to dig out Lin Air. However, the problem now was that Nan Tianyong's death was not even worth Ramjia's attention. To make a big fuss over such an insignificant person, in Ramjia's eyes, was an extremely ridiculous and stupid thing to do. Since his superior already had such an attitude, it was understandable and normal for his subordinates to feign civility and go through the motions. Ramjia could ignore it, but as the master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua could not completely disregard the reputation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Chapter 3851. From Shanghai Tianhua's words, the Southern Heaven Gate could tell what the pavilion master was trying to say. It seemed like he did not want to interfere with the disciplinary hall. As a matter of fact, just as the Southern Heaven Gate had thought, Shanghai Tianhua did not want to pressure the disciplinary hall, or strictly speaking, Ramjia, just because of Nan Tianyong's death. Ramjia was a trusted general that Shanghai Tianhua had personally raised. He had always been highly regarded by the Southern Heaven Gate. Although there had been some criticism in the past, Ramjia's ability and achievements were obvious to all. Everyone had their own way of doing things. Since Shanghai Tianhua thought highly of Ramjia, he would not interfere with Ramjia's business. Otherwise, if he were to interfere too much, not only would it bring no benefits, it would also cause a rift in their relationship. With the wisdom of Shanghai Tianhua, he would not make such a low-level mistake. Furthermore, although Nan Tianyong's death was a big deal in Shanghai Tianhua's eyes, it was still a small matter. His personal intelligence had already reported to him that Nan Tianyong had tried to kill Lin Er in front of the crowd, only to be killed in the end. Based on Shanghai Tianhua's usual way of doing things, even though he was the pavilion master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he wouldn't blindly protect his own people. It was normal for cultivators to kill each other, as long as they weren't killed by underhanded means. Even if it was a core disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion who died, Shanghai Tianhua wouldn't make a big fuss about it. Deaths were bound to happen in the Jianghu. Since he was not as strong as the pavilion master, there was nothing more to say. He deserved to die. However, it was impossible for Shanghai Tianhua to tell his disciples about this. He could only express his stance by treating it coldly. The Southern Heaven Gate initially thought they had a chance to convince the pavilion master to help them. With just a few words, they would be able to pressure the disciplinary hall, and Lin Er would have nowhere to hide. However, they did not expect Shanghai Tianhua to treat it so coldly. In front of the top boss of Shanghai Tianhua. After all, the Southern Sky Gate was only an insignificant figure. Since the big shot had already expressed his stance, no matter how dissatisfied the small figure was, he wouldn't dare to continue dwelling on this issue. Otherwise, if he angered the big shot, it would be hard to say what would happen to him. Pavilion Master, this disciple also knows that the law enforcement hall has its own rules and does not allow external forces to interfere. This disciple has no complaints about this, but this disciple and Nan Tianyong are brothers from the same mother. Now that my brother has been killed, I can't just sit back and do nothing. Even if it's just me, I must avenge him. The South Heaven Gate's eyes were filled with tears as he spoke in a righteous tone. The passionate and righteous expression was obviously an act. However, the South Heaven Gate was not afraid of being seen through by Shanghai Tianhua. Even if it was a fake act, the content of the words was the truth. Whether it was for the reputation of the three heroes of the Nan clan. In order to give their eldest brother, Nan Tianba, a satisfactory explanation with the Southern Heaven Gate's current situation, they had to find Lin Er and avenge their third brother, Nan Tianyong. You're quite ambitious. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Shanghai Tianhua nodded calmly, but didn't say anything else. Based on Shanghai Tianhua's temperament, no matter how noble or lowly he was, he would always praise hot-blooded and loyal men. However, he had behaved in such a cold manner. It was obvious that he had seen through the South Heaven Gate's plan. The South Heaven Gate's face blushed in embarrassment. Luckily, he was quite shrewd. He managed to remain calm and continued. Pavilion Master, I, an inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Yuja witnessed with my own eyes that the person who killed my third brother, Nan Tianyong, was a rogue cultivator who called himself Lin Air. The only person who knows the identity of this rogue cultivator is the manager of the Hong Merchant Guild, Hong Zhong. Lin Air, Shanghai Laner, who was playing with the little curly bear, pricked up her ears when she heard the familiar word. Although Lin Yi had never told her that he was Lin Air, and Shanghai Laner had always been naive, her intelligence was not low. She could easily guess the relationship between Lin Yi and Lin Yi based on what Lin Yi had asked her to do. Even if she was a bit confused about why Yuja couldn't recognize Lin Yi in front of him, she could still guess what was going on. She just didn't point it out. Lin Air killed Nan Tianyong? After hearing the South Heaven Gate's words, Shanghai Laner was stunned. Due to the fact that she had been supervised by Shanghai Tianhua for the past few days, the rumors that were spreading in the outside world did not reach her ears. She was stunned when she heard the news. Shanghai Laner was not strong herself, but she had been influenced since she was young. She knew the strength of a supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion like the back of her hand. He was at least at the peak of the late-stage Foundation establishment realm. Her junior brother was able to kill him. Shanghai Laner was instantly curious. She did not care about Nan Tianyong's life or death. In comparison, she was closer to her junior brother, Lin Yi. Therefore, it went without saying that she would side with Lin Yi. Previously, Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe had been looking for the so-called Lin Air. Since this pair of master and disciple had been plotting against her junior brother, Lin Yi, they were definitely not good people. Nan Tianyong must have pushed them too far, so her junior brother had no choice but to kill them. That must be it. Shang Wanlan wasn't interested in the conversation between her grandfather and the Southern Sky Gate, but now she was interested. She just wanted to gather some information for her junior brother Lin Yi, so that she could prepare for anything in advance, so that Lin Yi wouldn't be flustered when the time came. Hong Zhong, Shanghai Tianhua hesitated for a moment, then looked at the South Heaven Gate and said, "You went to find him?" Seeing that Shanghai Tianhua seemed to be interested, the South Heaven Gate became excited and said, "Pavilion Master is wise. According to what I know, this shopkeeper Hong not only has a close relationship with Lin Air, but he also added fuel to the fire during the conflict between Lin Air and my third brother, Nan Tianyong. His intentions are extremely sinister. Today, this disciple went to find shopkeeper Hong to inquire about Lin Air's identity. But unexpectedly, not only did this shopkeeper Hong refuse to cooperate with me, but he also rudely ordered several honored guests to kick this disciple out. This is simply not putting our Soaring Sky Pavilion in his eyes. This is intolerable. Please uphold justice for this disciple." At the end of his speech, the Southern Heavenly Gate was filled with righteous indignation. This time, he wasn't faking it. When he recalled the scene of him being thrown down from the second floor, the Southern Heavenly Gate's face couldn't help but burn with embarrassment. Chapter 3852. Since Shanghai Tianhua had no intention of pressuring the law enforcement hall, if Southern Sky Gate wanted to find Lin Air, they had to turn their attention to Hong Zhong again. If they could persuade Shanghai Tianhua to put pressure on Hong Zhong, not only could they get the information about Lin Air's identity, but they could also help them vent their anger, killing two birds with one stone. Today's situation at the Hong Merchant Guild was completely out of his expectations. The old man Hong Zhong did not even place the personal letter of Hong Ying's Four Directions supervising inspector in his eyes. However, in the eyes of the Southern Heavenly Gate, no matter how stubborn Hong Zhong was, as long as Shangwan Tianhua was willing to speak up, Hong Zhong would have no choice but to kneel and lick his boots obediently. Even a strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts, not to mention in front of Shanghai Tianhua, the top boss of the North Island. Even if Hong Zhong was a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was far from the title of a strong dragon. He couldn't even be considered a snake. He was at most a worm. You said that Hong Zhong was adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes? Do you have any solid evidence? Shanghai Tianhua asked with a slight frown. Speaking of which, between him and Hong Zhong. One was the top tycoon in the North Island, and the other was the spokesperson of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce in the North Island. Not only did they have a lot of official cooperation, but they also had a good personal relationship. However, in Shanghai Tianhua's understanding, Hong Zhong had always been kind to people, and he had a good reputation. How could he be adding fuel to the fire in this kind of thing? Pavilion Master, before my third brother had the accident, he was thrown down from the second floor of the Hong Chamber of Commerce by Hong Zhong because of Lin Air. On the day when my third brother fought with Lin Air, he deliberately let Lin Air hide in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for 2 hours. After coming out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was only at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, but he was able to kill my third brother, who was at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, with one move after coming out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. If the Hong Chamber of Commerce didn't do something, who would believe it? There are many witnesses. I dare not make any false report. Please investigate. Southern Sky Gate knelt down again and kowtowed. Lin Yi instantly killing Nan Tianyong had nothing to do with Hong Zhong. However, from the other people's point of view, it was only natural for Hong Zhong to be blamed for this. Otherwise, who would believe that a mere cultivator at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm was able to kill a cultivator at the peak of the late stage with a single move? Perhaps only the Hong Chamber of Commerce, which had gathered countless treasures, could achieve this. Perhaps they had some kind of consumable treasure that could instantly kill a peak late Foundation Establishment expert. Furthermore, before that, Lin Yi had indeed intentionally stayed in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for 2 whole hours. Such a long period of time was more than enough for him to do anything. It was hard not to be suspicious. Shanghuan Tianhua took a deep look at Southern Heavenly Gate, who was kneeling on the ground. His expression turned serious. The South Heaven Gate would not dare to hide the truth from him. In that case, the death of Nan Tianyong was definitely related to the Hong Merchant Guild, especially Hong Zhong. After pondering for a moment, Shanghai Tianhua finally said, "All right, I will ask Hong Zhong about this matter." Although he had a good personal relationship with Hong Zhong. However, Shanghai Tianhua had always been clear about public and private affairs. Since Hong Zhong was indeed suspected of adding fuel to the fire, as the pavilion master of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he had to intervene. Hearing this, Southern Heavenly Gate was delighted. He was delighted. As long as Shanghuan Tianhua was willing to step forward and ask about this matter, then his objective today would be achieved. As long as Shanghai Tianhua intervened, Hong Zhong would not dare to hide anything from Lin Air's identity, unless he didn't want to stay in the North Island anymore. Just as Southern Heavenly Gate was secretly delighted, Shanghai Laner suddenly said, "Grandpa, it's inappropriate for you to do this." Inappropriate my ass. The pavilion master of Soaring Sky Pavilion intervened on behalf of his disciple. This was a matter of course. Inappropriate my ass. Southern Heavenly Gate almost wanted to curse, but when he saw that it was Shanghai Laner who spoke, he had to hold back the curse. Not only could he not show any dissatisfaction, but he had to smile awkwardly. "Oh, what's wrong with it? Little Lon tell me about it." Shanghuan Tianhua asked with great interest. In front of his granddaughter, he was completely an ordinary kind elder. Moreover, although Shanghai Laner did not like to cultivate, she was smart since she was a child. She often had clear and unique views on many things, unlike people in high positions like him, who were sometimes blinded by some interests. Shanghai Laner said seriously, "Grandpa, you once taught me that a gentleman can't complain and cultivate himself." Nan Tianyong couldn't defeat Lin Air and lost his life, but he insisted on blaming Grandpa Hong, who was obviously an outsider. He even asked Grandpa Hong to stand up for him. Isn't this ridiculous? If this precedent is set, then in the future, if any Soaring Sky Pavilion disciple loses outside, won't you have to stand up for him, grandfather? Ugh, mistress, Hong Zhong can't be considered an outsider. He's the one who's adding fuel to the fire. South Heaven Gate immediately tried to defend himself. Adding fuel to the fire? Do you have any proof? Shanghai Laner rolled her eyes at him and said, "From what you said just now, from the beginning to the end, you can't prove that Grandpa Hong is really involved, right? Or can you guarantee with your life that the killer move that Lin Air used to kill Nan Tianyong was given to him by Grandpa Hong for free?" This, Southern Heavenly Gate, was speechless. How could he have proof for this? He was just using the logical thinking of ordinary people to pour dirty water on Hong Zhong. If he really wanted to guarantee with his life, he did not have the guts and courage to do so. Moreover, even if he could prove that Lin Air's killer move was given by Hong Zhong, how could he prove that Hong Zhong gave it to him for free? In the end, it was all Hong Zhong's words. It was an unsolvable problem. Left with no choice, the South Heaven Gate turned to Shangwan Tianhua. There was no way he could refute Shangwan Lan Er's words. Even if he could, he would not dare to do so, as what if Shangwan Lan bore a grudge against him? If this miss were to say a few bad things about him in front of her grandfather, then the future of Southern Heavenly Gate would be bleak. So what if he was the eldest senior brother of the Soaring Sky Pavilion? Shanghai Tianhua could easily make him fall to the ground with a single thought. Fortunately, the Southern Heavenly Gate was relieved that this was only Miss Shangwan's own words. As the pavilion master of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua would always consider his own interests first. He would not be as naive as this Mississippi. However, Shanghai Tianhua's next words made the Southern Heavenly Gate's jaw drop. Chapter 3853. But Southern Heavenly Gate still wanted to say something, but Shanghai Tianhua waved his hand and interrupted him. After all, my identity is still too sensitive. If someone with ulterior motives thinks that the three pavilions are dissatisfied with the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the impact will be huge. This was not an excuse. For someone like Shanghai Tianhua, anything he did would be interpreted by people with ulterior motives. If he listened to Southern Heavenly Gate's words and asked Hong Zhong about it, it would be easily misinterpreted as him being dissatisfied with the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, as Shanghai Laner had said, unless Southern Heavenly Gate could produce conclusive evidence, Shanghai Tianhua would not easily step forward. "Grandpa, I'm right again. The three pavilions are not allowed to interfere with the business of the Chamber of Commerce. You can't take the lead in breaking the rules. Furthermore, Grandpa Hong treats your granddaughter so well. Xiao Bai was even given to me by him. How can I make things difficult for Grandpa Hong just because of someone's side of the story?" Shanghai Laner said proudly. Yes. Little Lan is the one who sees things clearly." Shanghai Tianhua chuckled, looking at the grandfather and granddaughter echoing each other, especially after noticing the deeply hidden, unfathomable look in Shanghai Tianhua's eyes. Southern Heavenly Gate finally realized that this pavilion master had no intention of stepping forward and asking questions. He was just putting on an act for them to see. Southern Heavenly Gate even suspected that Shanghai Laner's words were secretly taught by Shanghai Tianhua in front of him. Otherwise, how could a naive girl like Shanghai Laner refute him so flawlessly and hit the nail on the head? What they didn't know was that although Shangwan Tianhua was acting, he had never taught Shangwan Lan to act with him. To be honest, Shangwan Lan had actually stepped forward to say such a thing, and even Shangwan Tianhua himself hadn't expected it. Apart from feeling gratified, Shanghai Tianhua could not help but feel a sense of pity. Although his granddaughter looked naive and innocent at first glance, she was talented and intelligent. However, he was talented, had a high level of comprehension, and was very quick-witted. He could be said to be an excellent cultivation material. It was a pity that he didn't want to improve. He didn't like boring cultivation. What could he do? Since Shangwan Tianhua had already put it this way, the Southern Heavenly Gate knew that it was futile to stay here any longer. In fact, he might even incur the ire of the First Mississippi. He had no choice but to bow respectfully and kneel down, saying, "Then this disciple shall take his leave." Shanghai Tianhua nodded slightly. Then he did not look at him and allowed Southern Heavenly Gate to leave. Looking at Southern Heavenly Gate's back, Shangwan Lana stuck out her tongue and said, "Grandpa, that person is so bad. He actually wants to instigate you to deal with Grandpa Hong. He really has bad intentions. He probably learned a lesson from your Grandpa Hong, so he wants to borrow this old man's hand to show off his strength." Shangwan Tianhua laughed and shook his head. Although Southern Heavenly Gate was scheming and shrewd, he was still too inexperienced to play tricks in front of a top-notch big shot like him. This person thinks he can use you as a weapon, Grandpa. He thinks he's smart. In my opinion, you should teach him a lesson and let him have a long memory. Shangwan Lanner said with a gloating expression. If it were some other big shot with slightly less tolerance, just because of Southern Heavenly Gate's bad intentions, in order to protect their big shot's reputation, they would not let him have an easy time. Of course, Shangwan Tianhua didn't mind at all. At his level, he already had his own way of dealing with things. He would not be angered over such a small matter. Shanghai Tianhua smiled noncommittally and said, "That's not necessary. This Southern Heavenly Gate is not someone who will give up so easily. Since I can't do it, I will definitely think of another way when I return. However, this is not something that I need to worry about." At this point, Shangwan Tianhua suddenly paused, turning to look at Shangwan Lan with a strange look on his face. "Little Lan, in the past, you've never been interested in such schemes and plots. Why have you suddenly become so enthusiastic today? Are you also interested in that rogue cultivator Lin Air?" "Of course not. I'm obviously standing up for Grandpa Hong." Shanghai Laner quickly denied it. She did not dare to let Shanghai Tianhuan know about Lin Yi. However, in her hurry, she did not notice that when Shanghai Tianhua said he was interested in the rogue cultivator Lin Air, he used the word also. Looking at the entire 3 pavilions, there were only a handful of people who could arouse the interest of the master of the soaring pavilion. It was proven that none of them were ordinary people. For example, the current master of the law enforcement hall, Ramjia. Based on Hong Zhong's character, Shanghai Tianhua believed that he would not deliberately help Lin Air to deal with Nan Tianyong. However, it was a fact that Lin Air killed Nan Tianyong in a second. An expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm was able to kill an opponent 4 levels higher than him. No matter what method he used, it was already a miracle. It was no wonder that Shanghai Tianhua, the top big shot of the North Island, would be interested in Lin Air. The next day, under the instruction of Miss Shangwan, Little Curly Bear brought the information and sneaked to Lin Yi's first cave residence at the foot of the mountain. The second of the 3 heroes of the Nan family, the senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, Southern Sky Gate, Lin Yi looked at the situation described in the letter by Shanghai Laner and could not help but be slightly surprised. He secretly sighed that Yuzha really did not give up. He had just killed Nan Tianyong and immediately pulled over an even more powerful Southern Sky Gate. Previously, using the True Chi Bomb to kill the defenseless Nan Tianyong was already Lin Yi's limit. If it was the more powerful Southern Sky Gate, or if they came prepared, then other than hiding far away, there was really no other way. However, what made Lin Yi rather touched was that Hong Zhong had only met him twice, but he was so protective of him. Without saying a word, he stepped on Nan Tianyong and the 2 heroes of the Nan family, and even almost fell to the point where the Soaring Pavilion's master, Shanghai Tianhua, came out to pressure him. This kind of favor was really touching. Although Lin Yi also knew that Hong Zhong must have done this mainly for his own sake, and Hong Zhong really did not know the details of his identity. No matter what, he still had to accept this favor. It seemed that he would have to take care of Hong Zhong's business in the future. For Lin Yi, if he could establish a stable cooperative relationship with an experienced and reliable business tycoon like Hong Zhong, it would also be a win-win situation for both sides. In addition to the Southern Sky Gate's visit last night, Shanghai Laner also analyzed the reactions of the higher-ups of the Soaring Pavilion and the Law Enforcement Hall to Lin Yi in the letter. Chapter 3854. After reading her detailed analysis in the letter, Lin Yi finally had a clear idea of the current situation. He wouldn't be caught off guard when he actually encountered Yu Zhe in the Southern Sky Gate, which would cause him to reveal his weakness. Other than that, Miss Shangguan also mentioned something that Lin Yi was concerned about. It was the trump card that Su Lingqiong and Meng Jueguang prepared for Meng Tong. Meridian Heart Shattering Pill. It can let Meng Tong level up. Lin Yi couldn't help but frown. This effect was even stronger than the Foundation Establishment Pill, but his instinct as a refiner told him that there was something strange about this Meridian Heart Shattering Pill. Even the practitioners on Sky Class Island didn't know about the Meridian Heart Shattering Pill, and Lin Yi had only been here for 2 months. Of course, he wouldn't have heard of it, but logically speaking, the stronger the effect, the stronger the side effects. The Foundation Establishment Pill was already heaven-defying, and the reason why it didn't have any side effects was because the miracle Dr. Zhang Liju had spent a lot of time researching and improving it. This Meridian Heart-Shattering Pill was even stronger than the Foundation Establishment Pill. So unless the refiner who created this pill had skills even higher than Zhang Liju, the side effects would definitely be terrifying. When he was in the common world, Lin Yi might have believed that there was someone on Sky Class Island who was better than Zhang Liju in elixir refinement. But now that he had seen Zhang Liju's legendary status on Sky Class Island, he had completely dispelled that thought. According to Ku by Shi Xiang, Miracle Dr. Zhang Liju's skill in elixir making was unprecedented, and no one could compare to him at all. Otherwise, how could he, a practitioner from the common world with no background, be able to stand in the middle island of Sky Class, where there were so many strong practitioners? Become a top-level master? From this, one could deduce that the refiner who created the Meridian Heart-Shattering Pill was at most on par with Zhang Liju. It was impossible to surpass him. From the looks of it, this group of people are already unscrupulous in order to regain their face. However, I wonder if Meng Tong knows the side effects of this. Lin Yi shook his head speechlessly. In his opinion, Meng Tong, this idiot, was most likely kept in the dark by Su Lingqiong and Meng Jueguang. Otherwise, if he knew that there were severe side effects, even if he knew that he could directly level up by 1 level, he wouldn't be able to do so. Normal people wouldn't dare to joke around with their lives and future. However, even though Meng Tong had leveled up, he was still not much of a threat to Lin Yi. What surprised Lin Yi was that since Su Lingqiong had the Meridian Heart-Shattering Pill, and Meng Tong's injuries were already healed, he should have been able to use it long ago. Meng Tong, on the other hand, had been keeping a low profile for the past few rounds. Lin Yi could see that the guy was still at the early phase of Foundation establishment, even though his body condition was much better than before after using some kind of medicine. There were no signs of him breaking through at all. Could it be that these people wanted to hide the Meridian Heart-Shattering Pill until the end, and then give him a surprise at the critical moment? Lin Yi thought about it carefully. If this continued, it was quite possible. There were 6 stages in the newcomer exam, and although the challenge stage was intense, the strong ones would be able to get a lot of points. However, its influence on the rankings was far from being able to determine the outcome. There was only one thing that could have an absolute influence on the ranking. That was the final stage. Although Lin Yi had this guess in his heart, for safety's sake, he still had to remind Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai so that they could be mentally prepared in advance, so that they wouldn't be at a disadvantage when they faced Meng Tong, who was at the early phase of foundation building. Avoiding everyone's eyes and ears, he quietly sent the little curly bear away. When Lin Yi returned to his cave abode, he found that the cave abode at the foot of the mountain was in a hubbub. Almost all the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion had come out of their cave abodes and gathered together, discussing spiritedly. What's going on? Could it be that they're announcing some new rules for the newcomer exam? Lin Yi could not help but be puzzled. In the past 2 months, this was the first time he had seen such a bustling place. Not only were Meng Tong and the others making a racket, it seemed that even Xiao Ran and Xiao Honkai were among them. When Lin Yi approached the group of people with a head full of confusion, he was stunned with just a glance. Among the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion, there was actually a woman, and a pretty one at that. A woman. After coming to Heaven Island for 2 months, this was the second woman Lin Yi had seen. No, strictly speaking, this was the first woman he had seen since coming to Heaven Island. Although Shanghai Laner was cute and innocent, she was at most a girl. She did not have the temperament of a mature woman. However, this woman in front of him, after 2 months of integration, even a newcomer like Lin, he had a general understanding of the situation in Heaven Island. Under normal circumstances, except for people like Shanghai Laner, the female cultivators of the 5 major islands in Heaven Island were generally concentrated in the West Island. This was an unwritten rule when teleporting, and it was also a rule within the local cultivator tribes. Unless it was the second or third generation of cultivators of each island, there were generally no exceptions. This also led to the gathering places of cultivators in the North Island, where there were often more men and less women, and it was extremely unbalanced. It was even more so in the Welcome Pavilion. If it were not for Shanghai Laner, the young lady, who would occasionally come over to show her face, the newcomers would not even think about seeing a woman all year round. The self-control of cultivators was far beyond that of ordinary people. Even many people had already become indifferent to the pleasures between men and women. Under normal circumstances, they would not think about women, but most of the cultivators were still normal people after all. It was natural instinct for the opposite sex to be attracted to each other. As the saying goes, after mixing with men for a long time, even if you see a sow, you will feel that you are handsome. What's more, the one who appeared in front of everyone now was a living woman, and she could be considered a beauty. But why would such a woman come here? When Lenny could not help but feel puzzled, senior brother Kubai, Xiao Ran, and Xiao Honkai had already squeezed to his side. Lenny could not help but ask, "What's going on? Could it be that a woman from a family brought her here to play?" This was the most normal speculation. If it was not like Shanghai Laner who came to play, could it be that she was a new disciple of the Welcome Pavilion? Chapter 3855. More importantly, Lin Yi could clearly see the woman's strength. She was an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundational building realm. Although Lin Yi's golden finger was limited after he obtained the heavenly axiom, he could still see the levels of cultivators who were weaker than him. Putting aside the 2 stewards, Meng Jueguang and senior brother Kubai, as well as Lin Yi, who had hidden his strength, this woman could easily look down on everyone. With such strength, why would she come to the welcoming pavilion? She could directly enter the 3 great pavilions. However, senior brother Kubai's answer stunned Lin Yi. Junior brother Lin, you're wrong. This woman's name is Murong Zhen. She's not here to play. From today onwards, she's a newcomer to the Blue Cloud Pavilion. Huh? Lin Yi could not help but be stunned. This situation was the most impossible possibility, but he did not expect it to come true. What was going on? It had been more than 2 months since then, but a disciple was added halfway through. Moreover, it was a female disciple, and a female disciple at the peak of the early stage of the foundational building realm. I don't know why this female disciple was suddenly sent here. Anyway, this is a special case, and the higher-ups tacitly approved it. After a pause, senior brother Kubai mysteriously whispered to Lin Yi and the others. It said that this woman has a powerful background. She's a distant relative of Elder Murong from the Soaring Pavilion. She's been in her hometown for a long time, but because she's quite strong, she was brought here recently. Senior brother Kubai's words did not dispel Lin Yi's doubts. Instead, he became even more puzzled. Since she was a relative of Elder Murong from the Soaring Pavilion, even if she was a distant relative, she could be considered a real second or third generation cultivator. With her current strength, if she wanted to join the 3 great pavilions, there was no need for her to go through the trouble of coming to the welcoming pavilion. Even if she really wanted to go through the motions, she should have gone to the Soaring Pavilion. Why did she come to the Blue Cloud Pavilion for no reason? There was probably something strange about this. Just as Lin Yi, senior brother Kubai, and the others were discussing, they heard the other newcomers of Blue Cloud Pavilion suddenly quiet down. Following that, they saw the crowd part to the side. This woman, who was the center of attention, walked gracefully in front of Lin Yi. Are you the Lin Yi they were talking about? Let me introduce myself. My name is Murong Jun. If you don't mind, you can call me Jin Jun. Murong Jun's pretty eyes were filled with lust as she extended her slender hand to Lin. Gulp. The crowd couldn't help but swallow their saliva. In their hearts, they were all envious of Lin Yi's luck with women. To be able to shake hands with Murong Jun was a blessing that could not be obtained in a few lifetimes. Not only was Murong Jun a beauty, but she was also a powerful female cultivator. There were even well-informed people who said that her family background was unfathomable, and that she was a true third-generation cultivator. It was impossible for Murong Jun not to become the center of attention when she was three different people. If he could gain her favor, not only would he be able to win the heart of a beauty, but he would also be able to become the son-in-law of a dragon. From then on, he would be able to reach the sky in a single bound, and he would be able to save a lot of effort. Before Lin Yi arrived, many people, including Meng Tong, tried to strike up a conversation with her. Unfortunately, Murong Jun did not even look at them, let alone take the initiative to shake hands with them. However, as soon as Lin Yi showed up, Murong Jun took the initiative to introduce herself. She even took the initiative to extend her hand. The difference in treatment between the two was like heaven and earth. Meng Tong and the others were heartbroken. At first, the crowd thought, since Murong Jun took the initiative, Lin Yi would definitely take advantage of the situation without hesitation. He would grab her slender hand and enjoy his luck with women. But what made everyone's jaws drop was that Lin Yi didn't do anything about it. Hello, I am Lin Yi. Lin Yi nodded with his arms crossed. He had no intention of shaking hands with her and responded calmly. Fuck, there must be something wrong with this pretentious guy's brain. Didn't they say this guy is a lecher? Why is he rejecting her when she's right in front of him? Is he addicted to acting tough? Meng Tong and the others were in an uproar. All of them were surprised, and their faces were filled with schadenfreude. Fortunately, Lin Yi was sick in the head. Otherwise, if he really took the opportunity to hook up with the great beauty Murong Jun, then all of them would be heartbroken. Murong Jun obviously did not expect Lin Yi to react this way. She was slightly startled and chuckled awkwardly. She then retracted her hand that was reaching out to Lin Yi. Due to the scarcity of women, ever since she came to the three great pavilions, no matter where she went, she was undoubtedly the center of attention. Even in the circle of the second generation of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, she could easily attract the attention of many young masters, and this even included Su Lingchong, the young master who was extremely valuable. Originally, everything was wonderful. Just when Murong Jun thought it would always be wonderful because of a party in Huayang House, just because of a moment of anger, the situation suddenly took a turn for the worse. Not only did she lose the attention of many young masters, she also became the target of public criticism. Almost all of the young masters in the Soaring Sky Pavilion were ostracized. That was not all. Today, she was sent to the Welcoming Pavilion for no reason. Moreover, it was the Blue Cloud Pavilion, a place where even birds wouldn't poop. How could she endure this? Murong Jun gritted her teeth in hatred when she thought of this. Back at Huayang residence, didn't I tell you the truth that you can't bring pets? You second and third generations. In order to please that little girl, Shangguan Laner, do you have to hit me when I'm down? Do you have to be so unscrupulous? Shangguan Laner, isn't she born with a good grandfather? So what? Even if I'm not as good as her in terms of family background, but in terms of temperament, appearance, and strength, how could that little girl compare to me? Shangguan Laner and those blind young masters, just wait and see. I'll make them pay 100-fold. When the time comes, none of you can escape. Women were the creatures that should never be provoked, especially Murong Jun, a scheming and shrewd woman. Once provoked, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, even though she was ostracized by the young masters in the Soaring Sky Pavilion because she offended Shangguan Laner, Murong Jun never thought that she would be treated coldly when she came to the Welcoming Pavilion and faced the new people in the Blue Cloud Pavilion. In fact, from Meng Jueguang to the rookies, all of them showed great enthusiasm towards this beauty. They fawned on her in every possible way, allowing her to quickly regain the feeling of being the center of attention. Chapter 3856. If it were anyone else here, Murong Jun wouldn't even need to take the initiative to extend her hand. Just a simple glance from her would make them kneel down and lick her feet. No one would be as cold as Lin Yi, not even willing to extend his hand. Even though it was a little awkward, Murong Jun quickly regained her composure. She said coquettishly, "In the future, we'll all be newcomers to Blue Cloud Pavilion. I'm just a weak woman who has no one to rely on. Brother Lin, you must remember to take care of me." The coquettish voice seeped into their bones, and since they hadn't seen a woman in a long time, even these practitioners with strong self-control couldn't help but feel their hearts fluttering. They wanted nothing more than to be in Lin Yi's place and pull this soft beauty into their arms, taking care of her. Lin Yi's response to this was a non-committal smile. He didn't have any intentions of responding at all. This scene once again made everyone's jaws drop. If they had thought that Lin Yi was stupid and didn't know how to appreciate favors, now they didn't think that way anymore. When they recalled the rumors that Lin Yi had countless girlfriends in the secular world, the crowd could not help but think that it was not that Lin Yi did not want to bother with the beautiful woman, Murong Jun. He was just acting cool out of habit and preparing to play hard to get as high and mighty cultivators, even if it was difficult for them to gain the favor of female cultivators of the same cultivation level. Their status among ordinary people was undeniable. If they really wanted to, people like them would definitely not lack women. Naturally, they had their own way of dealing with women, playing hard to get. As long as the situation was controlled well, not only could this move leave a deep impression on the other party, it was also more useful than trying to please them. However, the prerequisite for using this move was that the person himself must possess sufficient attractiveness. In the world of cultivation where the strong were revered, the person must possess sufficient strength. At the same time, the person must also possess a powerful background. Otherwise, it would only produce the opposite effect. In terms of strength, although Lin Yi's strength was not bad compared to the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion, he was only in the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. Murong Jun, on the other hand, was an expert in the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. She was superior. In terms of background, Lin Yi was just a grassroots newcomer in the secular world. Even if everyone present was a grassroots loose cultivator, their background and strength were much better than Lin Yi's. After all, no matter how poor they were as local cultivators, they still had friends and relatives. Moreover, this Murong beauty was rumored to be related to Elder Murong of the Soaring Pavilion. Her background was unreachable to anyone here, let alone a weakling like Lin Yi who had come from the common world. Let's wait and see. Sooner or later, this pretentious old man will shoot himself in the foot. When that time comes, it'll be interesting when Beauty Murong steps on him. Meng Tong sneered. Beside him, Li Jingming couldn't help but grin when he heard this. Did Boss Lin Yi really have some thoughts about this Morongjin? He wasn't sure, but at least he knew one thing. If they really fought, Boss Lin Yi would definitely trample his opponent to death in a matter of minutes. There was no doubt about this. Therefore, in his opinion, Meng Tong's self-indulgent thoughts could only be described with one word: naive. However, he obviously wouldn't say this out loud. He just cooperated with the cold sneer. Of course, the target of this sneer was not Lin Yi, but the newcomer Meng Tong. Seeing that Lin Yi didn't respond to her, Murong Jun was a little annoyed. This guy, why didn't he take the initiative to give face? The reason why she took the initiative to express her goodwill to Lin Yi was because she saw that Lin Yi was stronger than everyone else. Moreover, the other newcomers of Blue Cloud Pavilion seemed to be quite afraid of him. She felt that this person was not simple and could be used. She originally thought that this kind of thing would be a piece of cake for a great beauty like her. She thought that she could easily make Lin Yi kneel under her skirt. She didn't expect that Lin Yi would be so unreasonable. He turned a blind eye to her in public twice. Did this guy think that he was a super rich young master like Su Lingqiong? Could it be that he really wanted a great beauty like her to take the initiative to throw herself at him? You're just an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator with no background. It's already a blessing that this lady is willing to look at you for a few lifetimes. And you want this beauty to throw herself at you? Bah, you're not worthy. Although she was annoyed in her heart, there were so many people watching. Moreover, this was the first time she appeared in front of everyone. Murong-jun didn't want to lose her poise and affect her image. She had not given up yet. Even if she was inhumanely sent to Blue Cloud Pavilion as a newcomer, Murong-jun didn't have the slightest intention of giving up. She still wanted to stay in Welcome Pavilion for a period of time. She wanted to take the opportunity to recruit a few powerful newcomers with a bright future. She wanted to prepare to deal with Shanghai Laner in the future. If she wanted to deal with Shanghai Laner, the high and mighty lady, the newcomers of Blue Cloud Pavilion would definitely not be of much use. However, they were not completely useless. When the time came, she could set up a plan to use them as cannon fodder. Because of Lin Yi's cold reaction, Murong-jun was embarrassed and annoyed. Next to her, Meng Jueguang, the senior who was in charge, took the initiative to help her out of this predicament. All right, everyone quiet down. Let me formally introduce everyone. Meng Jueguang pretended to be gentle and smiled at Murong-jun. Then, he loudly introduced, from today onwards, Lady Murong is officially a newcomer of Blue Cloud Pavilion. Like everyone else, she will be participating in the newcomer assessment. As for the assessment that she has already gone through, there is no need to make up for it alone. After a pause, Meng Jueguang continued. Also, because the 15 caves at the foot of the mountain are already full, according to the orders of the higher-ups, we are to build a wooden house for Lady Murong as a temporary residence. Hearing this, everyone looked at each other. If they said that they weren't the least bit confused about Murong-jun's arrival, they would definitely be lying. With Murong-jun's strength and background, if she wanted to join the 3 great pavilions, it would be a simple matter. The fact that she joined Welcome Pavilion halfway through was already strange enough. Moreover, she did not join Soaring Sky Pavilion, but Blue Cloud Pavilion. Because of this, even if she left Welcome Pavilion in the future, according to the 3 great pavilions rules, she could only become an inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion and not an inner disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion. The difference in treatment between the two was huge. For Murong-jun, who was supposed to become an inner disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, this was simply inhumane and merciless suppression. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.